Welcome to Speak of the Devils, the premier podcast for Sun Devil football. I'm Brad Denny with 3TV.
I'm Joe Haley with DevilsDigest.com.
Joe, we are just days away from the start of the 2023 football season. The Activate the Valley era is upon us. Sun Devil football will be played, and that just means that it's, as tradition dictates, it's time for our season preview and predictions roundtable. We're going on the record tonight.
That is correct.
All right. And so, of course, we have a couple of great guests here with us to do that because we just can't do it ourselves. We have two experts, the Devil's Digest boys, as we've kind of nicknamed them tonight. Of course, coming back for appearance number 92, Rabino, publisher of DevilsDigest.com.
Thanks so much for having me, Brad. Like you said, tradition like no other. When I'm invited to be in the illustrious company of you and Joe, you know that football season is closer than ever.
All right. And of course, making his debut, only 91 appearances behind. Surely you'll catch up pretty soon. The new phenom on the staff, Caleb Campero.
Phenom is very generous, and I appreciate that. But it's a pleasure to be invited and to be included. I was telling you guys earlier, Devil's Digest voice has a good ring to it, and it's something that I've listened to, I can be a part of.
All right. So now as we get ready for this season, of course, being in the huddle at devilsdigest.com is essential at any point of year, but especially as you're getting ready to go into this new football season. Lots to talk about, lots going on. Hode, a lot of, there's a pretty good deal upcoming for the few people as of yet who are not yet in the huddle.
Yeah, I mean, we ran a great deal a couple weeks ago during Camp Zona, $23 for all new annual members. So if you missed out on that deal for one reason or another, don't worry. There is still a very generous deal that's actually going to be network wide coming up later on this week. 60% off all new annual subscribers. So just make sure that you're on the lookout on our front page at devilsdigest.com for that deal. Make sure that you get in. That is going to be the last deal before the season opener, and you'll have access to all our premium features, our analysis throughout the season, practice reports, and obviously the lively discussion that's taking place on our premium message board, Devil's Huddle. So one last chance to get off the sidelines, get in the huddle.
All right. So definitely make sure you get in the huddle, join Joe and I, and of course, Caleb and Hode, all the great stuff that the Devil's Digest staff puts out each and every day, getting you ready for the season. And as we mentioned, and if you didn't happen to catch it in our live show or last couple of shows, big news coming, Joe and I are coming to your TV on the Arizona's Family Sports and Entertainment Network. We are debuting the Speak of the Devils, the TV show, on August 30th on Wednesday evening. We're coming at you. And then after that week, once the season really kind of gets underway after that Thursday opener, we're going to be coming at you on Thursday evenings each and every week, and then a Saturday re-air to get you ready on game day. Now, it'll be over the air, and it'll be on Cox Channel 13 or antenna Channel 44. So definitely join us there. We're still going to be doing the podcast version as well. You'll catch us on YouTube, and if you're not able to catch the TV show live as it airs, it'll be available on YouTube as well.
So we want to send a big thank you to one of our sponsors, Jones Auto Group, which has been servicing the state of Arizona and the Sun Devil community for more than 50 years with multiple locations across the state. They are as strong as it gets when it comes to their support of Sun Devil athletics and the ASU community. You already know by now that they're deeply involved in the NIL game. They have been pretty much every year since that whole thing came into existence. Jones Auto Group has had NIL arrangements with members of the Sun Devil football team for years, including 4 players this season, driving some pretty sweet rides courtesy Jones Auto Group. Believe me, it is your support that allows Jones Auto Group to play such a critical role in ASU's NIL strategy. At Jones Auto Group, the Sun Devil community is truly treated like family. If you're concerned about any issues that might stand in the way of you purchasing the vehicle that you want to drive, reach out to Jones Auto Group. They can put together a winning game plan just for you, and you can check out the tax advantages that you can get by purchasing a vehicle from them. When you're looking into purchasing a new vehicle, you want to work with someone you trust. Make it a fellow Sun Devil, Parker Jones, who's not only the owner and GM, but a third-generation ASU alum, and just like you, just like us all, a diehard Sun Devil fan. He's given out his cell number. That's right. You can call or text Parker, the owner, directly. Skip the awkwardness and the pressure the car lot experiences elsewhere. Hit him up, 602-881-8998. Again, that's 881-8998. Check them out online and browse their inventory of new and pre-owned vehicles at jonesautocenters.com. Jones Auto Group, Arizona's best since 1970.
All right. So as we are here, going to do a season preview before we end the show with our on the record predictions. We're going to start with the defensive side of the ball. And the way Joe and I have structured this is we're going to do a kind of break things up into 12 big questions, 5 on offense, 5 on defense, and 2 kind of big picture and kind of, 30,000 foot view of this 2023 season. So guys, we're going to start on the defensive side of the ball. And of course, start in the trenches. Is my first question for the panel. Do you feel that there's enough depth on the interior defensive line to field a quality defense?
I think, Brad, that's right now a TBD in terms of an answer. I do like what I see from Deshaun Mallory and Anthony Cooper. Both are veteran players. Deshaun Mallory, obviously the transfer from Michigan State, as we all know, it was a really dicey situation whether he was going to end up at ASU or not. Was supposed to initially be here in the spring, ended up coming in the summer, but the performance that we saw from him in fall camp was definitely very, very encouraging. And Anthony Cooper is just really a grizzled veteran, not only on this defensive line, but really on the entire defensive side of the ball. So that's really a good starting point for Arizona State, I feel. Then you got the freshman phenom, CJ Fight. I mean, what a great story if you're an ASU fan that follows recruiting. The guy committed under the Herm Edwards staff when that staff was not continuing in Tempe. He decommitted and then decided to recommit to the Kenny Dillingham staff. And it's been an absolute blessing, I think, for this defensive line to have such a young and talented player that was here in the spring and was able just to get better and better each and every practice. So to have him as a quality reserve is definitely something that does help Arizona State, quite a bit. But ultimately, it's a freshman. You just don't know what you're going to get from him, even in a reserve role. And then you have 2 transfers: Sam Benjamin from Idaho State and Tristan Mundy from Wisconsin, and they have been playing, pretty well. Can you say at this point their quality depth? I think that is again something that is going to be determined and really materialize itself over the next a few practices. But if there's something that does keep, I think the defensive coaches up at night, I think it is that interior defensive line, because right now you might have somewhat more of unknowns than knowns over there at that role.
Yeah, I'm really concerned there, just kind of on the depth, because even just like the Deshaun Mallory, who's been really impressive in fall camp and making his presence felt, and just talking to him, you get a sense that I think his mentality is also in the right place as well as his play on the field. But he wasn't a full-time starter or really a starter at all for Michigan State. Anthony Cooper's been around this program for a while, and as you mentioned, kind of that grizzled vet at defensive end. Now he's kicking inside, and then of course CJ Fight, true freshman, and 2 transfers who have not played really at all or extensively at the FBS level. So defensive tackle is a brutally physical position, and we've seen the struggles that any team has had in terms of being able to field a consistent rotation. Just all defensive line, even Zamey's got its kind of handful, kind of devising the repetition or the division of reps there. Caleb, how do you think that this defensive line is going to hold up? I mean, obviously you got those guys, BJ Green's been seeing some time a little bit inside as well. He's got experience there, but he's been so explosive off the edge. Like, how concerned are you right now about the interior of the line holding up?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And like you said, BJ's been getting in there, kind of in the mix, but I think you can't really take somebody off the edge in this scenario. And CJ Fight has been, had a really good fall so far. But I think that's going to kind of be the question to be answered, is when you have some of that youth coming up in the interior, as much as reserved is what the word Hode used, is how much, what will that word reserve mean in a couple of weeks? But I think it's really going to come down to, the youth in terms of freshmen like CJ Fight. But I do think that they're going to be fine with guys like Anthony Cooper or Deshaun Mallory, at least there. But it's just tough to say right now in terms of what the success is going to be like, especially as deep in the trenches, anything can happen in a moment's notice, unfortunately. And I think it's just something that, like Hope said, is going to be TBD. As are these younger guys going to really, get a nice feel for, the college game and at ASU, and, all of these questions and, all the things that we're asking about the program so far. So, I would have to agree with Hode, TBD. But I think things, if they go like I'm sure they want them to go, that they're going to be somewhat deep.
Now, Joe, we've seen that just last year, the ASU defense, especially kind of the run D, just get absolutely shredded up the middle and not being able to kind of get any success at the point of attack. How concerned are you about just the potential for, of just the middle of that defense? Perhaps maybe not, obviously I think the quality might be there, but just maybe getting worn down just because there is so many unknown quantities in those two spots.
I mean, it can't get worse. It can't be as bad. Last year was an absolute nightmare embarrassment. I mean, every single defensive coach that was on that staff should be finding no, they're obviously already looking for employment elsewhere, but they should be finding new lines of work, because that was absolutely pathetic. The way that ASU played defense last year, completely unmotivated. It's hard for me to even put words of English language together to talk about how awful that was. So that's the past. It could improve by a significant degree and still be very bad. So that's going to be a big question to answer, because, yeah, you feel confident in maybe the pass defense, maybe the pass rush. Again, there are things that simply statistically are unfathomable to be as bad or worse as last year, but that could still put you in a bad spot. So I don't know. My hands are I'm shrugging like everybody else. It's a big thing to figure out, and something that I think not enough people are really talking about. That there's a lot of excitement going on for good reason, but yeah, you could have people getting gashed, and you could have those real uneasy feelings in your stomach before long, because there's a lot of talent that's going to be attacking ASU, and they made some absolutely pedestrian athletes look like freaking Barry Sanders out there. So that's what's on the line, and they got to step it up. Like, they got to I know that people aren't around from last year coaching staff wise on that side of the ball, which is a very good thing, but there needs to be a near 180-degree improvement just for this to be a respectable thing.
Now, on the flip side of things, of how you kind of the vibes, if you will, edge, defensive end. Woo boy, they've been looking good, and they've been looking good since spring. BJ Green just seems to be an absolute destroyer of worlds since that move out there. You got Clayton Smith, the former 5-star, looking really good. Prince Dorbas turned it on in the Texas transfer in the last couple weeks. Elijah O'Neal is a former guy who had 11 double-digit sacks at the JUCO level. Ashley Williams did a lot of guys on here, and they've been making the offense's life hell in spring and fall camp in terms of getting after it. Guys, how good do you think this pass rush is? Because obviously last year, as Joe kind of alluded to, awful. I mean, I wouldn't try to go back as far as the online digital records that ASU could allow in terms of a season in which they had fewer sacks than I believe it was 17 last year. Couldn't do it. Just what was the data wasn't available. So obviously an average season or even below average season gets improvement there. But how good, based on what we've seen so far, do you think that this pass rush can be?
Yeah, I think the talent is definitely there. I think the job they did in the transfer portal has been absolutely masterful. Like I said, Clayton Smith from Oklahoma, Prince Dorbas from Texas, Elijah O'Neal, one of the better junior college prospects, in this class. I mean, those are quality additions. You mentioned BJ Green, who really is the only proven pass rusher from previous teams on this roster. And you haven't even mentioned Michael Matusia.
Yeah.
And I know some people would tend to forget him because he did miss all of last season due to an ACL injury. When you talk about just the veteran leadership, as somebody has been there, done that, that's definitely a big asset. Garen Stansbury, the young player from Louisiana, who might, when you look at ceiling of potential, might be like the guy on this Arizona State roster. But to me, it's even more just the coaching philosophy of defense coordinator Brian Ward. A lot of Pac-12 schools, including Arizona State, saw what Brian Ward, did do with his mug fronts right there in the trenches. How much chaos he created up there with athletes that I think, if you just look at the overall caliber, we're at a lower caliber than what he has at Arizona State. So the toys that Brian Ward and his staff have at his disposal are definitely much more, shinier, if you will, than what he had at Washington State. So, then that goes back, I think, also for the interior defensive line. I mean, sure, the sheer talent is not there. And maybe, again, if you compare it to what Ward had at Washington State, maybe he did in that specific element have ever better athletes. But I think a lot of it's really just going to be having the right scheme for the right players. That's going to maybe require more creativity when you talk about the interior of the defensive line, but the exterior, there is more than enough athletes to really increase the pass rushing efforts. Like I said, Brad, the bar was so low last year. There's nowhere to go but up. But nonetheless, that not diminish from the fact that there's better coaching. There definitely is better talent, and ultimately, it's going to be a scheme that's really going to fit the personnel of this team more than it did in 2022. And to me, that might be really the biggest difference, and what you're going to see from the front four for Arizona State, especially when it comes to the pass rush.
So, Caleb, you've been keeping a close eye on the offensive side of the ball during practices, and we'll get to the offensive line in more detail later on. But there's been some struggles. Some guys have been banged up and some switching around.
Yeah.
How much do you think that the defensive or the pass rush's performance might be attributed to maybe just some inconsistencies on the offensive line versus just they're that damn good?
No, and that's exactly where kind of my mind was going to answer the question. Is just, you see some of the periods that they run in practice, and when they just try to find some space to run the ball on the outside, it's just not there. I said a couple of practice reports ago that, the interior run has looked better, but they still just cannot, there's just not much success in practice, trying to run to the outside. And I don't think it's much of because there's been some shift at, the tackle position. I think it's just, you have guys like Clayton Smith who have already, seem to be paying dividends. And, we already mentioned BJ Green, and I'm still really, really curious to see how Michael Matus is going to kind of come back. I think a lot of people still kind of have kind of written him off, but it's, this was a guy that a lot of people were talking about before he got injured. So in that sense, I think that in terms of like the defensive line and all, I think the edge is going to be definitely the most solid factor of it. And I think it's going to be the difference between a game like last year. You look at when ASU played USC and you're trying to get Caleb Williams on the floor. And granted, it's Caleb Williams, I understand. But, the difference from last year to this year is going to be I feel like is going to be the difference when you get the quarterback on the floor and it's not so some people would say painful to just like, see a quarterback, wiggle out of there, especially with all of the quarterbacks you're going to see in the Pac-12 this year. But, like Code said, you can only go up from where they were last year, but I think this is more than going up. This is like a big step in the right direction.
All right. So, Joe, as you talked about, this defense last year, pretty bad. And the pass rush was essentially non-existent. They got the talent to do it. They got an aggressive scheme, but how much of an improvement do you feel is necessary for ASU to kind of enter the realm of an average or even above average Pac-12 defense this year?
I mean, a lot, because like I said, it's still within the realm of possibility that they might get gashed again, by the run. This might have to enter into Todd Graham, like just sacrifice it all and attack like hell, even though it might come back to bite you in other ways. Like you kind of have to do that, because the saving grace of this defense is going to do anything. It's going to be predicated by the pass rush. Like, this defense should be improved, but again, there are weaknesses and there are depth issues. There are concerns, as there should be. It's not all, puppy dogs and rainbows when it comes to this kind of stuff. I think that there's, a middle ground on a lot of topics with this team where there is a lot to get excited about. But then there are also things where, I've seen some fans that kind of have their head in the clouds, and I know that this is kind of elaborating to a point that's not for this particular segment, but the future. I see people that are picking ASU to win 8-9 games. You're expecting them to triple their win total and have what would be the biggest turnaround, one of the biggest ones in conference history and the biggest in school history. To me, that shows that I mean, not that this is anything new, but there is a lack of reality. So why I bring that up is that there needs to be an understanding that there are areas that need to be improved. And so that if people think that this is just going to become a shutdown, lockdown defense and a air it out 50-point a game offense and everything is fine, then I would suggest to take a little dose of reality. So circling that all back around to the point here is the pass rush to me is really going to be the catalyst of this defense, and they're going to have to carry a lot of weight. And so to do that, it can't just be millimeters of improvement. It's got to be yards.
So moving to that second level of the defense now at linebacker. Now, of course, this is a 4-2-5 base scheme. There's going to be 2 linebackers out there. And kind of like the defensive interior, some guy, you got one guy who's kind of like a situational guy, had some playing time at his previous stop. And then a lot of guys that are kind of unproven or inexperienced collectively at this level. So Travion Brown, of course, comes over from Washington State, very comfortable in this defense, but he's never a full-time starter for the Cougs. And then a lot of young guys headlined by Will Schaefer, James Joncom, Caleb McCullough, guys who've been around the program a while, Tate Romney, Crew Jackson in that mix as well. But we know that ASU tried to add some veteran starting experience in Juwan Mitchell. That experiment did not work out. We'll start with Joe this time. How worried are you about kind of just the collective lack of significant experience at the FBS Power 5 level at the linebacker spot right now?
It's a major concern. It's a major concern. If there's any injury issues, the quality of your defense really skids to the point that it's a massive liability, and I'm hoping that a position is not created where people look back and say, man, really miss Kyle Soley, really miss Merlin Robertson, really miss those guys, really miss some of the depth players. I mean, a guy like Kyle Soley, yeah, you're going to miss him no matter what you do. He's maybe not an all-timer, but he's a guy that you'd have on your team every single year. It's paper thin. Yeah, there's some talent there, and maybe there's some younger guys, but you do have some guys that are in their 3rd, 4th year in the program that you're hoping they play at a high level. And so that's a gamble, like I said, it's a good thing that this defense doesn't rely on them as much as other defensive schemes would, but it is paper thin. If you get one guy knocked down for any period of time, it could be a major issue unless you just have these emergences that would be major blessings of like a Romney or a Crew Jackson, where I'm not saying out of nowhere perform at a high level, but they exceed what you expect out of them. Because just stating the facts, if those guys are regularly in the starting lineup, I know that the situation is what it is for the early part of the opening game because of Will Schaefer. But if you're talking about them being consistently in the starting lineup, either you're hoping for a miracle or you're concerned that you're going to have massive liabilities week in, week out.
So obviously, one of the other outside of Trey Brown, Will Schaefer, as Joe mentioned, kind of a guy who's been around a while and had some spot starts, played a lot of on special teams, but he's looked really good so far, and kind of maybe has a chance to kind of rise to meet this opportunity. Really, one of the guys who kind of like Kyle Soley, a fellow SaberCat, transformed his body over the course of his years here, and just like night and day different. Do you think he's ready to go as kind of that complimentary starter alongside the veteran Trey Brown?
Let's put it this way, Brad. He really has to be ready to go. And I know that when Juwan Mitchell was still here in Tempe, that Will Schaefer was the player that was adversely affected the most and really regulated to more of a backup role than a starter role. So the fact that Mitchell was dismissed from the team due to disciplinary reasons definitely gave Will Schaefer, more life and more motivation, I think, to succeed. But when you look at the other starter, Travion Brown, I mean, granted, had an okay career at Washington State, and as much as we talk about that unit defensively being one of the better ones in the Pac-12 last year, it's hard to say that Travion Brown was one of the leaders. But the fact that he was coached under Brian Ward and under his position coach, A.J. Cooper, who are now here in Tempe, I think really just allows to have that so-called coach on the field in Brown that can really help bring all those linebackers on the same page. It really maybe is a blessing that there's only 2 linebackers in the base defense in this scheme, because, like as Joe alluded to, the depth really is not there. But yeah, I think a guy like Will Schaefer can can step up, be that complimentary contributor to Trevian Brown. And you look at players like Caleb McCullough and James Joncom. I think they definitely showed some flashes in fall camp. Krug Jackson's another guy. So we need some maybe overachieving for some players here at the linebacker. Sure, I think that's definitely a fair statement to make. But just going back to my earlier point about the defensive line, I just feel that now you have a coaching staff that is really going to highlight the strengths and try to mask the shortcomings in the overall scheme, and then specifically going position group by position group to really employ that philosophy, and that may actually be the biggest asset that this defense has related to any position, including linebacker, that may overshadow overall lack of talent or lack of depth.
And so one of the key elements here, I think, is my position coach, AJ Cooper. And it seems like a lot of the guys I talk, or most of the linebackers I talked to, have been raving about him in terms of just, especially the veteran guys, about what the level of coaching was a year ago versus now, and just kind of the approach, incremental growth, and focus on technique. And the one thing that they've really harped on is he's a teacher. He's a guy that can help elevate guys' games. And so perhaps we might see some guys who've been around and perhaps not grown and developed, maybe take some big strides forward. Caleb, who are some linebackers that you think, outside of that starting duo of Brown and Schaefer, who are some guys that do you think are most likely to be, big time contributors? Because obviously you can't just get by a season with two backers going at it. So who are the guys that you think are going to be rising to meet this opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, you talk about needing to meet this opportunity, and I think it's eventually going to come down to who wants it more. Classic question that you ask a football player, but somebody that I do see that is, gets involved in special teams is James Joncom, but it's somebody who not only I feel like has had his moments where he's shown that he's, he might be ready to maybe have an increased role and getting in there, but I mean, if you just look at the guy, he has the body for it. He's ready.
He looks like a linebacker.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've told you, Brad, at practice, if I were to see James Joncom in a hole, I think I'd want to bounce it to the outside. But he's somebody who I've seen, has had his moments and might need to hear the call a little bit more if he hasn't already, in terms of just like there's kind of like that third to fourth linebackers role that's going to need to really be emphasized, especially when you start getting into those games where you're in Salt Lake or you're in Seattle, and I think of people like Kavion Thunderbird or Crew Jackson, both of those guys. I mean, with the linebacker position that I've noticed in practice is that there seems to always kind of be a different name involved kind of day to day, besides the kind of, Will Schaefer and Trey Brown kind of duo. And so it's going to be really interesting to see just kind of like who one day or will have more better days consistently. But I would say those three names are ones that I kind of, as much as I kind of, like you said, pay attention to the offense, or so, it's like, oh, there's that number again, or, hey, there's Jackson, there's Crew Jackson again. So they're young, but I think it's just going to come down to like who wants this role more.
All right, so I feel like we're kind of like ping-ponging back and forth between like the defensive tackles, some concern, edges, feeling pretty good, linebacker, some concern, cornerbacks, feeling pretty good. At least I'm feeling pretty good, because I think that there's a lot of quality guys there, both returning veterans and a lot of young talent as well. So the question I'm going to toss out to you guys is: cornerback right now the deepest position on the team?
I would say yes. I mean, even though he's more in that nickel position, I think Jordan Clark is just doing a great job energy wise and just he's being a good veteran. But man, I mean, you just look at a guy like Rotorins in practice, who isn't the most vocal guy, but is really leading by example. And then you see a guy like, D Ford, who, if I'm sure some fans who maybe aren't keeping up with like, keeping up with everything consistently is like, there's a 5'8" cornerback out there, like what's going on? But if you've seen some of his clips in practice, I mean, it's like, no, even the 5'8" guy is, is putting in the work against somebody, like a Troy O'Meary, who's got some size on him. I mean, Chris Edmonds seems to, just kind of pop up every other day as well. It's just Ed Woods, and that's another name that you're just kind of like, oh, there's Ed Woods with the interception in practice. And I mean, it's just in terms of depth, I mean, you're gonna have really 2 to 3 guys out there, and I mean, I think you have probably 5 to 6 good ones, on a good day, especially. So I think definitely, I think they're gonna be probably handing more of that job to the interior linemen and those linebackers a little bit more. But in such a pass heavy conference like the Pac-12 is at sometimes, I think that's kind of that's the hand you want to be dealt with.
Yeah, you talked about it, just in this quarter, like this conference of quarterbacks, and the Pac-12 Media Day. That's all the message they were trying to run. We got a lot of good quarterbacks. Like, yeah, they do, but ASU's got a lot of good corners because you mentioned Bro Torrance kind of had the breakout when he was healthy last year, but Ed Woods is the guy who's really jumped out to me day in, day out. I think him and D Ford kind of that cornerback 2 role. Feeling pretty good about what you got going on there. Of course, at nickel, you got Jordan Clark, Mason Williams, another guy I thought has had a pretty strong fall camp. And then kind of the youngsters like Keith Abney. Oh boy, that's a player. And Hode, I know that you one of your former staffers is pretty big on Keith Abney. Well, overall, what's your evaluation of kind of the cornerback pecking order right now?
Yeah, I think the cornerback group is really deep. And when you talk about the improved pass rush that Arizona State should enjoy this year, needless to say, the biggest beneficiaries are going to be the cornerbacks, or just really the secondary in general, because I feel that when you have quarterbacks that are truly going to be more often than not pressured into making throws that they probably don't want to make, maybe zeroing on a wide receiver instead of really surveying the field, just because of the improved pass rush that Arizona State is going to present, then there's no doubt in my mind that the secondary, especially the cornerbacks, are going to be the biggest beneficiaries. But yeah, like I said, there's really just a lot of names that you throw out here. I mean, Ro Torrance. I think that if you made a list of the best returning cornerbacks in the Pac-12 and did a top 10 or top 7, there's no way Ro Torrance's name is not going to be on there. D Ford, I know he's somebody that the coaches were very, very high on when he was recruited by Arizona State and arrived on campus. But him and Ed Woods are really having quite the battle. And I think Ed Woods is one player that Kenny Dillingham really was highlighting just the other day in his comments. So it's really great to have that competition over there. And I think Mason Williams being moved to the backup nickel to Jordan Clark, I think is a real good move for Mason, because I think he just really found more of a home there, if you will. And one of the reasons we're able to move Mason Williams is, as you mentioned, Keith Abney the second, by the way. But one of those true freshmen that I think, as much as myself and Cole Topham really did like, coming out of high school and watching his film, I think maybe just a little, snuck up on all of us, because again, this is really established position group to begin with. But somebody like Keith Abney II has definitely been a really pleasant surprise, and now is going to be absolutely part of that too deep, and just another testament of to the great job that Arizona State has had in coaching the returning players and really bringing some new talent to a position that is a very thankless one, especially in the Pac-12. But I think when Arizona State looks at their other conference foes, I think they feel probably pretty good about this cornerback position.
All right, so Joe, speaking of the corners, and you had obviously made it clear that this pass rush needs to kind of step up to get this defense to even a passable level, or even to where it wants to go. How do you feel like the perceived strength of the cornerback position kind of maybe helps, and kind of that relationship between the pass rush that's trying to improve its game versus already kind of what seems like a strength for ASU at corner?
They're going to need to be a strength, and we'll see how much they need to be. Like I said, really concerned about what's going to happen against the run. I'm not concerned to the level of thinking that they'll be as bad as last year, but they need to prove themselves, and that can tip into some troubling territory if, let's say, the run defense is exceptionally bad once again, because then you put mountains of pressure, no pun intended, on trying to get to the quarterback and your pass defense to where they almost have to play with perfection, because if they don't do their job, the other side of the defense, so to speak, of defending the run, if there are major issues there, then that becomes a catastrophe. So again, I'm not trying to be excessively negative about it, just realistic and thinking about how this is still the team, as different as a lot of things are. It's still the team that had the issues that they did last year on defense. I get it's a whole different coaching staff, especially on that side of the ball, a lot of different personnel, but you're still trying to build up from that pile of rubble that it was last year. So the pass rush and the pass defense in conjunction with one another need to be strong, just like they do on any team. But I'm curious to see if that's going to tip into such a pressure-packed obligation to essentially be perfect, because the other elements of the defense are so far off from what they need to be. Certainly hope that's not the case, and we may be surprised. But again, eager to see how much disparity there is between defending the run / pressuring the quarterback versus defending the pass.
All right, so moving on to the safety position. Now, like a few weeks ago, I would have felt really good about this position, because you had guys like Chris Edmonds coming back, a returning starter who led the team in picks a year ago. Xavier Alford was lights out and really good, and it's continued to be in fall camp. Shamari Simmons, same note, making the jump up from the FCS level, just kind of a ball hawk, heavy hitter as well. True freshman Montana Warren, really good. Looked like he was locking up a 2-deep spot, even getting a lot of run with the ones. Fast forward to today, the NCAA and kind of the infinite wisdom. You don't like the chances, maybe necessarily at this point, of Alford being granted the waiver. Montana Warren, unfortunately, suffered the shoulder injury. So it's, I think at this point now, off the original timeline, 5 to 7 weeks. He's had a week to heal up already. So all of a sudden, like, that depth chart is taking some pretty key hits. So the question to the group, and we'll maybe start off with Caleb this time: how concerned are you by the lack of maybe FBS experienced safeties at this point?
I would say definitely a bit concerned, especially again referencing the kind of quarterback heavy conference that you're dealing with. We just went over how our corners have really proved that they're probably going to be the biggest strength of the defense so far. But they're like a lot of the other defensive positions. There have been some glimpses. One name that I seem to kind of circle back to sometimes is Damon Williamson. He was only at the University of Mary not too long ago, but there have been times where, you see him, and I want to say he's had a couple of interceptions through fall so far, where it's like, you know what, hey, if you can hang with your kind of cornerback counterparts, then it'll be fine. But in the conference that you're dealing with, I don't think you just want to be fine. You want to be a little bit more solidified. And I don't think right now that they're in a place where that's going to be a great thing to rely on. The last thing you want is to get beat deep, through a hole between the corner and the safety and stuff. And I think at the FBS level, the game moves just that bit faster, and you have that much better athletes. And right now, I think they're handling it, but it's handling it against the same receivers and stuff that you've seen every day since pretty much spring. And, you're going to get guys like the Goliath of a receiving core at SC, or you're going to see some guys from Washington and some guys at Oregon and Oregon State that, will burn you, can burn you. And right now, I think that's probably, I don't know, 1, 2, third kind of on the list of where we're probably most worried about right now. But still, I'm really curious to see how kind of the FBS, game treats them.
Yeah, so obviously, you go from like 4 guys you're feeling pretty good about to just a couple, and even one of those has never taken an FBS snap yet, in Shamari Simmons. And then Josiah Cox has had some good moments as a true freshman, but again, kind of like we were talking about some of the defensive line, like with CJ Fight, you're putting a lot on the shoulders of a true freshman on a defense that's really kind of trying to undergo a very thorough revamp. Like how do you evaluate kind of the state of the safeties over the next 7 weeks? And even then, like, we still don't know how Montana Warren's if he's going to kind of pick up where he left off or kind of hit the ground running.
Yeah, I mean, I think depth is definitely a concern over here too. I think ASU coaches should feel pretty comfortable with Chris Edmonds and Shamari Simmons. And I know Simmons, like you said, is somebody who has not taken one FBS snap in his career, but nonetheless, it's hard for me to see somebody has been consistently as good as he has during fall camp just suddenly just do a 180 and just be poorly performing every week once the season starts, and maybe the presence of Chris Edmonds, who's not a grizzled veteran, but somebody who played obviously for ASU last year and played pretty well. I think could be that real calming effect. Look, but there's no doubt about it. I mean, Xavier Alford, that's a matter of when, not if. His NCAA waiver for immediate eligibility is going to be denied just because wide receiver Jake Smith, ironically, had the same, by the way, track as Xavier Alford, committed out of high school to Texas, transferred to USC, and now coming to ASU. I think that unfortunately he's going to have the same fate, and that is an absolute blow. And I don't know if ASU is really going to be able to fully replace Xavier Alford. And if they are, they just really need some players to really play over the head. So if it's David Williamson, like Caleb mentioned, or Josiah Cox, the true freshman, I mean, they definitely have shown flashes. Is it going to be enough when it's all said and done every Saturday? That remains to be seen. I also wouldn't forget about Roman Rashada, Jaden Rashada's older brother, showing some flashes here and there in camp, and I know has been really tried at different positions in the secondary. Not necessarily a veteran player in terms of game experience, but definitely an older player that I think may just see his number called more than even he thought he would be called during the fall camp. But there's definitely a lot of figuring out over there at the safety position for Arizona State.
All right. So, Joe, how do you think that this group of safeties, just with a lot of upside, but perhaps lacking in experience, maybe outside of Chris Edmonds at the FBS level, it's going to be holding up against this conference of quarterbacks?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like linebacker, not as dire, but you feel decent about the first string of guys, but even one injury, and again, not quite as concerning as linebacker if someone takes a fall, but you're still going to be concerned with these hits that you didn't necessarily foresee coming a month or so ago with Alford and Warren. You figured this was going to be a stockpiled position group. Now that has become quite thin, and yeah, there's upside potential with freshmen, but a couple wrong turns and they could be thrown into some significant action probably ahead of their preparation level. So if they can stay healthy, I'm a fan of Edmonds. I think that he can get it done. I think he can emerge as someone that can battle for some of the medium to lower level all conference honor type of situations. So not something that I'm saying is a fear, but like a few positions, not just on the defense, but the team as a whole. I mean, they gotta keep it together, not only keep it together health wise, but hit the ground running. So that's going to be something to keep an eye on for sure.
All right. So as we kind of put a bow on the look at the defense, maybe go a lightning round around the panel, 1 to 10. 1 is extremely concerned, 10, no concern at all. What is your level of concern about the collective defense as the 2023 season draws near? We'll start with Caleb.
I'm gonna have to say about a 6, maybe 6.5. I'm really confident in the defensive backs, and like Joe said, just in that kind of first group of safeties, I think it's good. But run sets up the pass, and if a team is going to be able to run the ball effectively against maybe an interior line that's struggling, and then back into maybe a linebacker position that may struggle down the line or down the stretch, then you're going to see some of those running backs in the Pac-12 have 100-yard rushing to 150 yards rushing, and then you want to start stacking the box, and then then there's gonna be a lot of quick slants, I'm sure, in the future. Just because of kind of like the if you want to just say like the box, interior linebacker and interior lineman, I would say about a 6.5.
All right, so more confident than not. All right, so Hod, how are you feeling?
I would give it a little higher at a 7. I mean, I do agree with Caleb's point that the belly of this defense definitely has some question marks that are going to be answered one way or another. And if you're an ASU fan, you hope they answered to your satisfaction. The reason I'm a little more optimistic giving it a 7 because I feel that it's not only the overall caliber of talent on this side of the ball is elevated from last year, but more importantly, it is the coaching level, the coaching competency that is much better this year than it is last year. And going back to an earlier point that I made, this staff I think is going to do a much better job highlighting the strength, really trying to mask the weaknesses when they devise a scheme each and every week, when they put players in certain roles, when they give them certain assignments to execute. That's to me is really what's going to make the difference between last year's defense and this year's defense, aside from the overall talent. But again, there's no way to sugarcoat the fact that interior defensive line and linebacker, especially when it comes to the depth of those two units, that's definitely going to be a concern. And as much, and I think Joe mentioned this, as much as we're talking about the pass rush being better and really having some good talent on cornerback, if teams are just going to decide to run the ball at you and not really be concerned with the pass that much. And I think when you look at the stats of the Arizona State defense in 2022, that's exactly what you did see when you look at the cumulative stats of the season. You just really don't want that to happen again in 2023. But this is something that I would just defer to Brian Ward and his staff to correct and to make sure it's not going to happen. So that's why I give it a 7.
How you feeling, Joe?
I was going to say to his point, he's like, because what was it, the UCLA game when they had 300-yard rushers and
Yeah.
Charbonnet didn't even play and they went over
Yeah.
400 yards? I mean, that was not that long ago.
The Arizona game too, by the way.
Yeah. I'm going to go even higher to 8, and this might be a product of me not being out of practice ever. It's not what I do. If you look across the defense, with maybe one exception, who I would say would be Ro Torrance, you can't say that there aren't significant questions that need to be answered for every other projected starter. Even someone like BJ Green, who's been having an offseason for the ages, he is still someone who was basically, a niche player his first 2 years. Yes, he led the team in sacks, but last year that's not a big statement to make. Across the defensive line, a guy like Clayton Smith, 5-star athlete, just hasn't done anything at the college level. Linebackers, even someone like Trey Brown, a good amount of experience, but we're not talking about a guy who's got 30+ starts under his belt. In the secondary, we just kind of talked about, there are guys that, hey, there are these flashes of improvement, these flashes of potential, but like so many players, when you're describing what you expect out of them, have a but attached to the description of them. So I might change my tune, and I hope I do, a month from now, that, yeah, Clayton Smith, he's the real deal. Yeah, BJ Green is going from role player to all-conference player. Yep, Deshaun Mallory, he's legit. Yep, Trey Brown, that guy is a force at linebacker. Yep, Shamari Simmons, even though he bumped up from the FCS level, that dude's ready to roll. Yep, whether it's Ed Woods or D Ford, yeah, like these, if those boxes are checked, then awesome. But for me, there are just so many question marks that, yes, there should be improvement. They may very well be, but you don't have, hey, we got Tyler Johnson back who had, 8 or 10 sacks last year. So there's that piece that you're confident in. There are just so many uncertainties, once again, that could materialize into good things, either across the board or the majority of them, and make it a good defense. But where it is right now, it's just, there's so much that's unknown. I can't defer to confidence quite yet.
All right. So for me, with 5 kind of being that middle ground, I'm going to be more confident than not. So I'll maybe like a 5.5, maybe not quite a 6, just because I do think they've improved in terms of the scheme, which is, I think, going to be light years better, at least more interesting, and give them a chance. I do think that the coaching, as you mentioned, Hode, is a lot better. So I do think that there'll be some improvements there, and we'll see. We've already seen kind of some of the younger guys develop, and I don't think that there's really kind of any issues of talent. As for me, it's depth that is kind of very concerning. We've talked about just kind of on the defensive interior, at linebacker, at safety, and it's just a matter of if, but when injuries are going to hit. It hits every football team during the course of your, it's attrition. It wears teams down, and your depth's going to rise to top. And this is year 1 of a very significant rebuild. And so some positions better stocked than others. On the defensive side, there's some concerns and some key areas as well. So I'll say from what we've seen, it's been a good, strong spring and fall camp for the defense. But for me, I will say things are trending in the right direction, but the depth concerns hold me back. So I'll stay a little bit more confident than not. So I'll say a 5.5.
2023 football season for ASU is right at the doorstep here, and you got to be stepping into the new season in style with some new gear from Cactus Sports. They're located at 514 South Mill Avenue in Tempe. Got it right?
Absolutely.
Okay, I cannot be making errors on this one. We got two representatives of two of our sponsors here, so yeah, we gotta make it happen. So if you can't make it into the store location in Tempe, get online, but we encourage you to go check out the store location because there are some people in this room that might be there to greet you with a warm smile. They'll get you the perfect Sun Devil fit from head to toe in one stop, of course, with the best ASU merchandise around at Cactus Sports. They are as passionate about making you look your Sun Devil best as they are about supporting the maroon and gold on game day. Like I said, if you can't make it into that store location, start putting together your ultimate Sun Devil gear wish list online at cactussports.com. There's free domestic ground shipping on orders over $75. So stock up, get your full season's worth. Heck, start getting holiday gifts out of the way, whatever it is. Any Sun Devils in your life, hook them up at Cactus Sports. You can follow them on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Cactus Sports AZ. Cactus Sports, ASU alumni, owned since 1992. Think local, buy local, be local. So diving into the offense, first things first, it's the question that's on everybody's mind. It's kind of a two-parter here. Who will be the starting quarterback? And barring injury, will that guy be the guy all season long?
Yeah, loaded question, Joe. No doubt about it.
If only there was a very detailed opinion piece on this very topic on devilsdigest.com.
If there only was. If there only was. Well, I've made my opinion known. And no, I don't have a dog in this fight at all. But I feel that Trent Bourget, the returning starter, does have a slight edge over Jaden Rashada. And I know that Kenny Dillingham has been very, very careful walking that fine line by giving quotes that you think, oh, wow, he's really supporting Rashada. Or, well, the way he's saying this about Trent Bourget, in an indirect way, maybe actually favors him. I think that there are just maybe 2 or 3 really key elements over here in play that I think should give Bourget the nod. First of all, I think is the chemistry and the trust level that he has with the primary aerial targets in Elijah Badger, in Jalen Conyers. You can throw in Gio Sanders, Andre Johnson, Messiah Swinson. That's a level of blind trust that the other quarterbacks, whether it's Drew Pine or Jaden Rashada, don't have, and maybe you say don't have yet with those wide receivers. So we talk about a seamless transition, having a better chance, I should say, for a seamless transition. I think Trent Bourget gives that to you. Another element that's really important, and I think is really not spoken enough about, is a major rule change this year in college football, where the clock will not stop on first downs unless it's the last 2 minutes of the half or the last 2 minutes of the game. And to have that quote unquote, game manager that is really going to excel more in the short and medium routes, rather than just have one 30-yard bomb after another, might really be the sensible approach to go. Because look, when you're going to play an explosive offense like USC or Washington, wouldn't you want that offense to be as least number of snaps, least number of minutes on the field? Of course you do. And if you're going to employ an approach and have a quarterback that's going to have that feast or famine aspect being so much of his game, then I think you're just really running the risk of having a lot of 3 and outs, or settling for field goals rather than touchdowns. And more importantly, the real kicker is going to be, okay, so now you got the USC offense, the Washington offense, the Oregon offense for that many more snaps on the field, for that many more minutes on the field. The games are going to be shorter. The stats for any quarterback, Bo Nix, Michael Penix, Caleb Williams, are not going to look anywhere like they did last year just because of that rule change. That is something that cannot be overstated. So when you talk about, oh, so this quarterback has more explosive plays and more explosive skill set in his arsenal, does it really mean that much when it comes to that rule change? And really, what might be an explosive play for you, the ASU fan, may not be even matching the philosophy of the offensive brain trust in Tempe. So I just think that all of those factors that I mentioned right now just make the more sensible approach of choosing Trent Bourget as a starting quarterback. I do acknowledge the fact that Drew Pine, I believe, was Kenny Dillingham's choice, because when he did go down, Kenny Dillingham did admit that this really put a monkey wrench in his timetable for naming a starting quarterback, and how he's going to think about naming a starting quarterback. And Drew Pine, to me, really has almost a carbon copy skill set to Trent Bourget. So that's another reason why I think Bourget is ultimately get the nod. I think Kenny Dillingham is giving Jaden Rashada every possible opportunity to showcase his skills. To Jaden Rashada's credit, and there's no denying that ever since Drew Pine did go down, and it's unfortunate that this is what it took, Jaden Rashada has elevated his game quite a bit. So even with all that in play, I think that Trent Bourget does have a slight edge over Jaden Rashada. Will I fall off my chair if Jaden Rashada is going to be named the starter by Kenny Dillingham? No, I won't. But I do think, my gut feeling, that Trent Bourget is going to be named by Kenny Dillingham, I guess 3 days from now at the latest.
It's really interesting, like how Kenny's been talking about and conducting this quarterback battle. He's talking about how he's deliberately scripting terrible plays that like the quarterback's gonna fail. He's giving like just 6 crap plays in a row to see how they react and go, handle those adverse situations. And and he's a smart guy. He's shrewd, so he knows that when he's talking about the explosive plays that Jaden's doing, right, and talking about explosive plays, kind of the same terminology in terms of what he's looking for the eventual winner, but at the same point, just kind of not building for the future. We're gonna in a win now mode. So a lot, like he's playing things kind of close to the vest. And I do agree with Hod. I think that Drew Pine had really kind of made a lot of ground up, because after spring, I thought it was like 80-20, 70-30 Bourget. And he just looked out, but Drew Pine flat out got better and kind of had that similar skill set, making more. And I think the advantage he had over Bourget was the greater willingness to throw downfield and attack defenses further and stretch those a little bit. Bourget is still a guy kind of that point guard role, but Caleb, obviously you've been taking close notes on the offense all camp long right now. Where do you see this battle? And as Joe talked about, is this going to be a guy that whoever is named the starter is going to be able to continue to be the guy?
Yeah, I mean, you talk about a wrench in things. I mean, Drew Pine going down, I think, like Hode said, I think it might have been a little bit in Drew Pine's favor, at Camp T. And, I think it also does come back to, I think Bourget is just the safer quarterback. He's the safer option. He'll take the check down. He's not going to try to force the ball downfield. And, he might not be the most explosive, or he's not going to throw the ball 70 yards down the field, and but I think in my personal opinion, I think Bourget will be named the starter, and I think that's somebody who they're going to be able to ride with, just because, like Code said, the chemistry is there with a lot of the guys. And I think when you get guys in there like Melquan Stovall, you get Messiah Swinson is getting more involved, it seems, as in the last couple of days. Xavier Guillory is somebody that I'm sure a lot of people are keeping their eyes out for. I think with the chemistry and what you're going to start building in terms of once the season starts, I think it's going to be, that's what you're going to have to ride with. And it's really, really unfortunate for Drew's situation right now. But it's like I said, like I was telling you earlier, Brad, I talked to Doug Holler the other day, and Rashada is showing what a 4-star is very capable of, and why he was the touted, recruit that, he was talked about, where Pine went down and Rashada came in and was like, I'm not going to let you just kind of take your foot off the gas pedal, Trenton. So, again, like Code said, if Rashada is named the starter, I'm sure a lot of Sun Devil fans who are riding this wave of this new era are going to be, not surprised or very happy. And I won't be like, I'll just be like, okay, like if that's who Kenny thinks is fit, and like Kenny said, the players are going to let him know who should be the starter. And if a lot of the guys are buying into more of like that aggressive playmaking ability that Rashada kind of brings to the table, then by all means, I mean, I'm getting paid to write, not to make those decisions. So but I think, depending on who is named, I don't think there's going back from whoever is that, whoever is getting picked, and that eventually is going to be stuck with. And it's just unfortunate how it's kind of played out for some of the other guys, but
And I'll just mention one thing about the explosive plays, Brad. I think that there is some disservice being done for Trent Bourget, and I'm not Trent Bourget's agent. Again, like, I'm not making money off Bourget being the starter. I didn't go to bet MGM, and play the odds over there. But Bourget had more than one or two explosive plays last year. And if you want to make the argument, okay, well, maybe you threw like an 8-yard out to Elijah Badger that turned into a 30-yard reception, or same with Jalen Conyers. Okay, fine. So if that happened in 2022 with much less talent around them, you didn't have an Xavier Guillory, you didn't have a Melquan Stovall, and even Messiah Swinson this year is a better version than what he was last year. Who says that Bourget really cannot do that again? And who says that Badger can't, turn an 8-yard out to a 30-yard gain, just like he did last year, again, under circumstances which were less advantageous that they are right now. So even when we talk about Bourget not being the explosive, quarterback as Jaden Rashada is, I'm not saying there's not any truth to that, but to really dismiss what Bourget did in shredding the offenses of Colorado, of Washington, even Arizona to some extent, even though it was a game that he'd like to forget in terms of turnovers. I think that folks shouldn't have really have that that short of a memory. I think Trent Bourget is capable of generating explosive plays. It may be more thanks to the weapons that he has rather than his sheer arm strength, but ultimately the result is going to be the same. A 30-yard reception is a 30-yard reception, and I don't think people are really going to put an asterisk or if but just because it was an 8-yard out that turned out to a 30-yard reception.
Right.
So staying within the topic, paint this scenario for you. So let's say Trent Bourget is chosen over Rashada this week as starting quarterback. Let's say that as the season progresses, ASU as a team is doing what you'd expect, not tanking, not lighting the world on fire. And Trenton hasn't really done anything to lose the job. Let's say, again, similarly, he's not playing out of his mind, but he's not losing the job. Does Drew Pine come back into the starting quarterback equation when he's ready, or has that ship probably sailed because of his absence at this part of the year?
I think that Drew Pine, more than Jaden Rashada, would be a threat to Trent Bourget. That is my opinion. Again, going back to my earlier point, that I feel in my hearts of hearts that Kenny Dillingham was going to choose Drew Pine to be the starting quarterback.
So I guess maybe a better way to ask the question, what will it take for there to be a quarterback change, barring crazy scenario of an injury or ASU starts 0-3, something catastrophic? What will the equation be that leads to maybe this book being reopened in a month or so?
And maybe I'll add a variable in there. Does the red shirt for Jaden perhaps factor in at all?
A lot of people tell you that in the world of the transfer portal, red shirts should not be considered like they were just 2-3 years ago. And that is a valid argument. And I'm not here to suggest that an unhappy Jaden Rashada is going to leave in 24 and 25. But I just feel that Kenny Dillingham is definitely going to play the best quarterback that he has at his disposal. Now, going back to Joe's question, so let's say, okay, now you got a healthy Drew Pine, and you got a healthy Jaden Rashada, and the offense is absolutely stalling under a Trent Bourget. Yes, I do think that Kenny Dillingham will not hesitate to bring the next man up. If it's going to be Pine and Rashada, and assuming Pine can duplicate the fine fall camp performance that he had prior to his injury, then I think it's going to be Pine to be the first one off the bench rather than Jaden Rashada. But make no mistake about it, if Pine is not healthy or just not performing well, and Jaden Rashada is QB2, if Kenny Dillingham feels that Bourget is just not moving the offense to his liking, even if it's not, being move the chains, short, medium routes and not really taking shots down the field. But if the offense is just not getting the job done, is not moving the chains, and you're going 3 and outs against offenses, to make my earlier point, that you obviously cannot afford to go 3 and out multiple times in the game, then I think that Kenny Dillingham is not going to hesitate to bring QB2 off the bench, whether it be Rashada or whether it be Pine. But I think if, again, both of them healthy, I think Pine will still get the nod over Rashada.
Do you think that perhaps the varying skill sets between Pine and Rashada might factor in terms of, just like, as you mentioned kind of earlier, Pine's more of kind of in that Bourget mold and perhaps, maybe stretch the field a little bit more, but Rashad, obviously, with that dual threat ability, that's something that nobody else on that roster has.
Sure.
Do you think that if there's a need for a jump start or a kind of, kicking the ass of the offense, that they might go and kind of, zag when they've been zigging?
I definitely would not bring it out of the question. I mean, looking at the schedule right in front of me, I think if this possibility comes into fruition, I think this zag to your zig, if you will, or will be when they play at Cal. Not to discredit any Cal's hard work, over the
It's okay. We
the
did plenty of
fall.
that on our Pac-12 preview.
Yeah, okay. So, but I think after, you're going to be you're going to know where you're at offensively after Southern Utah, Oklahoma State, Fresno State, and then USC. I think, after that USC game, you see where you're at after 4 games. And it's like, do we need a little bit more explosiveness? And I think that change might come, at Cal. Now, I think if let's say Bourget's named the starter, now it's kind of like I think it's up to Kenny of what he really wants. And I think, unfortunately, it kind of, in my opinion, takes kind of Rashada's favor, because if Drew is, like we've talked about, is more of that mold that Bourget is, then you're going to want a little bit more, explosiveness, or, how could I say that, off the script type of play that Rashada has kind of brought
Like
to the
Bo
table.
Nix excelled at that last year.
No, exactly. And I mean, something that I've noticed so much over the last couple of days at at practice is, Kenny is not, afraid to show that he's really pulling Jaden to the side, talking to him about what he's seeing, talking to him about what he's doing. And unfortunately for Drew, I think that Rashad is kind of a step ahead of him if they do want to move in a different direction about that halfway point of the season. Just because it just, the way he plays, it's just that spark. It's that different. It's something that you've kind of come to expect in the landscape of college football nowadays from a quarterback perspective. So I think it would just kind of take kind of like that lackluster. Kenny's not seeing what he would like to. You've seen the offenses that he's worked with, especially at Oregon, where, Oregon, as they've been for a decade, have been that flashy, score a lot of points, play kind of fast kind of team. And if he wants more of that and he's not really getting it, he might just, hey, we're playing at Cal. I'm sure the stadium isn't going to be crazy packed. So if we want to try something, it'll be now. It's early enough where once we go down the stretch of Colorado, Washington, Washington State, Utah, the latter half of the season, that would probably be the moment. So I think it's really going to be up to Kenny on really what he wants, or what he thinks the team can succeed, depending on who's kind of at the helm.
One of the interesting things of, like, any quarterback competition to me is, like, especially when they're close and this far along in camp, is somebody's going to get named the starter, but how much in the back of their mind, like, are they worried about just like, okay, one pick, or like, how comfortable or how short is that leash in terms of just like the any mistakes that being made, or how much that plays in the back of the mind. And we've talked a lot about, what Bourget has brought, and we've talked a lot on this show since spring, and how Trent's been looking good in this Kenny Dillingham offense and all the factors. But Joe, we've had sitting in that very seat, just Jaden Rashada just a couple weeks ago, and just talking to that young man. I mean, you mentioned the skill set, and you're talking with Doug Haller about, I mean, he shows in practice like what a 4-star blue chip quarterback looks like. At the same point, you also, in those same practices, will show you he's a true freshman still learning the job. But just, I think, from the neck up, I mean, he's got a certain quality to him. And obviously, the way the ball comes off his hand has a certain
Yeah.
quality and zip to it as well. So it's a really tough choice. But to his credit, like he's battled, and I think he's, in the, like this, going back to the scrimmage on Wednesday, some freshman throws, but then some, as Kenny called them, NFL throws. So especially the off script on the move stuff. The one play that he was rolling out, rolled out to his left is maybe early last week, and threw it, between two defenders to Gio in the back of the end zone. That's just something you're not going to get with Trent. Now, you're not going to get necessarily a lot of those freshman plays with Trent either that you would have with Jaden. So it's really an interesting situation. I think it's really close, and it's going to be interesting because I think in terms of a course correction, I think it might be easier to go from a Bourget to Rashada than vice versa, because having a young quarterback get pulled, you just never know how that might handle from the mental perspective. But man, so it's going to be interesting. We got Caleb with the Bourget is going to get the job, Hode on that train, and so I'll third that. I think by a narrow margin, I think Bourget gets it this year. But obviously, Jaden, I think, is the quarterback of the future. But I mean, in a way, it's a good problem to have, and in the way it's not. It's weird. And then you got the Pine element into the mix, who, I kind of agree with you that like seemed like, based on the comments and the way that the trajectory in practice, maybe he was going to be that QB1. So it's going to be interesting couple days and first couple weeks of the season.
So move along to running back. I know comparing this staff to the previous one is kind of apples and oranges, but with the exception of that short COVID season, we haven't seen any use of running back depth since 2017 when you had DeMario Richard, Campbell Balaj as seniors. Herm Edwards and how he operated, and with the offensive coordinators he has, it was one dude that was carrying the ball and then a big drop off. Even when you had talented guys like Daniel Ngata or Chip Trainum, didn't see the light of day. So with this group of running backs, you have one guy with some college experience, albeit not at this level, and then others that are young, inexperienced, still a lot to prove. So are we going to see a legitimate use of depth? And if so, what is that shaping up to look like?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of shaping up to look like, I think this is again another just kind of situation where it's a little bit different than what Sun Devil fans are used to seeing. Ex Valade last season, Rashad White before, and so on and so forth. But even the usage in practice has been very telling of where I think Kenny is. I think it's been very obvious that Cam Scadaboo and DeCarlos Brooks are kind of that 1-2 that are really going to be in there, taking passes out of the backfield as well. And I think those two are very complementary, where Cam is not afraid to lower a shoulder, into the interior, defense, and but he's agile enough to get out into, and catch the ball out of the backfield. But instead of that drop off from, I'd say, DeCarlos Brooks and Cam Scadaboo, I think it's just Javen Jacobs, Kyson Brown, George Hart has been playing really, really good the last couple of days. Tevin White, is a name that, some days comes up and some days doesn't, but it is just, it's been a really fascinating thing to watch, where I think in kind of the modern era of running backs, I know we kind of saw in the NFL where you can never really have enough. I think that is a really big plus in the conversation for the offense, where if one goes down, you have 5 others, and it also can't hurt to just have fresh legs, where you have a couple guys. Granted, some of them are on the younger side, that are able to just kind of all kind of fit somewhat of the same scheme. I would say Kyson and Javen Jacobs are a little bit more, that shiftier, can maybe move into the slot type of guy. But, other than that, I think they're in a very unique position where I think you're not going to get that premier, this is the guy, running back, where it's going to be kind of a success by committee. But I think at the running back position, I think that's a great thing to have. Some people might say, well, that's going to affect somebody, older guys, looks from a NFL scout or something. But if you're just talking about success out of the backfield for ASU football this year, I mean, it's going to be something that's very beneficial.
It's interesting. Like every year I do a podcast with Sean Aguano, and last several years, I always ask him the question, kind of head in the year, like, where are you on kind of the workload distribution? And he's every year, it's always like, I prefer to get some rotation, have a lot of guys get touches, and you really use that depth. And then the last several years, it's always one dude getting, as Joe said, of getting a ton of work. And the results, obviously, you're not going to argue with. You're not going to put up, or not going to, put aside Validay's like 18 touchdowns and 1,200 yards rushing or whatever. But then I also look at this, at the Ducks last year, they had a couple guys, over 130 carries, over 700 yards each. And so this is an offense that likes to keep things fresh. And I agree with you, Kale. Obviously, I think Cam Scadaboo's your starting guy who's going to get the most touches out of that group, barring injury. And during the spring game, I tweeted out, that this is a 10 touchdown guy this season. I stand by. Nothing I've seen taking me off. I do think that DeCarlos Brooks has probably made some good movement in fall camp. I think he's that number 2 there. But Hode, I know like one of the guys that I think we're both impressed of, Kyson Brown. I mean, he just looks good. Like, where do you see true freshman? There's some depth, but he's been looking good. Do you think that he's like has a chance to not redshirt?
Yeah, I'm starting to think more and more that he actually may not redshirt. I mean, I said just a few days ago, he's going to give the coaches that quote unquote good headache. Like, do I redshirt him? Do I not redshirt him? You talk about, as they say, off the bus, all team, and Kyson Brown is definitely it. I don't know if he's quite 6'2". He might be closer to six foot even, but he's definitely 205 pounds, 9% body fat. I mean, just think about like a Frank Darby, in terms of physique, and you get somebody like Kyson Brown. I mean, just a player that I don't think any defensive player for ASU, no matter how talented he is really eager to tackle him when he sees him barreling down the field. Does he have
They build them different in Texas, I'll tell you that.
They really do, and the South too, by the way. But I would say if he's going to be the number 3 running back when at the season opener, I think that might have at worst a 50% chance of happening, and maybe even more than that, because I don't know really if guys like Jevin Jacobs and George Hart, not that they haven't had their flashes in recent practices, but Kyson Brown still has that wow factor, and it's been disappointing to see Tevin White. I mean,
I was going to say, like, where do we make of him? The former 4-star guy? And
full disclosure, I mean, I picked him as an X factor guy because I believe the coach is saying that they don't want Scadabo to be that a workhorse, running back that's going to have 90%, 95% of the carries. I really do believe, now that I didn't believe the coaches in previous regimes saying, "Oh, we're going to have running back by committee," but this staff, I really tend to believe that they want that to happen, and I thought Tevin White was going to be that running back too. And I'm not saying that DeCarlos Brooks now is something that position is dire straits for ASU by any means, but Tevin White is just really an enigma to me. I know that the second half of spring practice he was out with an injury, and I don't want to say that's been lingering ever since April, but something is going on there that we're not really seeing him take the next step, because as much as I like Kyson Brown, I think Tevin White even has a higher ceiling than Kyson Brown, if I'm being honest about it. So I think all those factors that I mentioned may by default make Kyson Brown, the true freshman, the number 3 running back, and a virtual shoo-in not to redshirt, something that I don't think I'd be sitting here and saying, back in July. But I think the running back stable is definitely a talented one. I'm not giving up by any means on Javen Jacobs or George Hart III to really make contributions throughout the season. And again, if you talk about just the quote-unquote good headache that Sean Aguano and offensive coordinator Bo Baldwin, for that matter, have with the running back group, I think it's a problem that they're really, really happy to have. And again, just really finally employing that running back by committee to ASU, which is only going to make the offense that much better.
So moving along to wide receiver, obviously a known commodity in Elijah Badger. We've been talking a lot about these other names that are on the roster, but maybe for those who aren't super in tune to things, who are a couple guys that are going to be right up there as far as, contributing. Maybe not the Elijah Badger level, because that guy's got, next level stuff written all over him. But who else are going to be beneficiaries if teams try to hyper focus on defending and stopping Badger?
I mean, it's I mentioned Xavier Guillory. I mean, it's just one of those guys when you see him run his routes, it's just very fluid. It's very just kind of like it's almost like seeing somebody dance, just kind of very fluidly, like interpretive dance. It's something that I kind of notice about him, and I think that's somebody, but he's very quick at the same time. I think the slot position is very unique, and I don't think a lot of people are familiar with Melquan Stovall and kind of the run, and kind of the back and forth that him and Gio Sanders, who I know a lot of people are familiar with. But those two slots, I mean, we've talked to both of them and how, they've had that kind of, brother camaraderie between the two of them. But again, another good thing where I think both of them have great stuff to bring to the table. And somebody that I'm very kind of excited to still see develop is Troy O'Meary. And, when I first, was watching, the first fall camp, the first day of fall camp, it was, it seemed a little raw at first, but I would say since Camp T, I mean, he has just kind of slowly kind of worked his way up where he is kind of not catching up to Andre Johnson, because I think Andre Johnson is a step ahead of him. There's another name, Andre Johnson, which I think is going to actually kind of turn a couple of heads, this year. But those two, I mean, in Troy's case specifically, his sheer size, if you see him, I mean, if you want a back pylon fade to be thrown to someone, if it's not Elijah Badger, you want it to be Troy O'Meary, just, and it's something that they did on Wednesday scrimmage where it was like 3 straight balls to Troy. And I think he came down with either 1 or 2, or maybe even, no, it was probably like 2 of them. But Guillory, Stovall, Sanders, of course, but I think 2 other just kind of like not really getting enough attention is Johnson and Guillory. I mean, Johnson and O'Meary. And as of recent as well, I mean, I think in terms of like kind of like that slot position, I mean, Caleb Black might very
He had a
well
couple
get in.
touchdowns on Wednesday.
Oh man, I mean, the guy for I would say the last couple of practices has really just taken a step forward, and first I was seeing him with kind of the 3s, and then maybe a little time with the 2s, and now it's like as much as these receivers rotate between the 1s and 2s, you see Caleb Black in there, and I talked to him the other day, and just somebody that you're like, whoa, like, hello, Caleb Black. What's
Another
up?
true freshman from Texas that might not redshirt.
Yep.
I definitely would not put it past him. It's just some of these guys have just really kind of somewhat come out of nowhere, and not even just for us, I'm sure for the coaches as well, where it's like, whoa, there is some of this youth, is starting to show in terms of, what it might not be so much in store this year, but it's something to definitely look for. You talk about Rashada maybe being the future, Kyson Brown and Caleb Black, that you want to talk about kind of like the Badger, Conyers, Bourget, it's going to be Rashada, Black, and Brown, and I think it's something that might not be on full display this year, but moving forward, something to look forward to.
Yeah, I'm really kind of disappointed. Obviously, the Jake Smith decision, nobody agrees with. I don't know if there's any chance of a reversal there, but I mean, he was starting to come along. He was got dinged up in spring, but man, he was. I mean, because if you had a situation where you were running out Elijah Badger, Xavier Guillory, who has just been from day one of spring looking like an absolute stud, Jake Smith in that mix as well, and then of course the slots are looking really good. Man, that would have just been something. But I guess, hopefully, some better days ahead there. But, on the O'Meary front, I mean, I just kept waiting to see. And finally, as you mentioned, we're starting to get that in the last few practices, maybe in the last week or 2. I mean, I just keep going back to red zone. You got him. You got Conyers. You got a 6'7" tight end in Messiah Swinson. There's some weapons. And, of course, Badger's ball skills. I mean, there's some matchup problems there.
Yeah, I mean, the depth wide receiver is absolutely ridiculous, even without Jake Smith, who, like you said, is a very, very unfortunate situation. And that maybe goes back to the question of who the starting quarterback's going to be. I mean, do you really need somebody that's just going to throw one go route after another with all those weapons that you have at your disposal? I mean, maybe not, because Elijah Badger, who got plenty of attention last year as being the wide receiver for Arizona State. I mean, very, very high on the scouting report, and still was able to produce the numbers that he produced. Well, now, I mean, he has plenty of teammates that are going to keep defenses occupied much more than they were last year. And I think Badger can really even eclipse his numbers. And really, to double team Badger, to double team Guillory would be absolute, suicide in a football sense for any defense to do, because you're going to have to beat those guys one-on-one. And the double teams or zone coverage may not just cut it with the caliber of aerial targets that ASU has. So it's definitely, I think, an exciting time for the offense, and really, having the ability. And I know you could talk about again the real low bar that was set in 2022 to really eclipse that bar quite a bit, and to make this offense really, really, really explosive. And going back again to the rule change of the clock not stopping on first downs, just when you have such a versatile arsenal at wide receivers and tight ends, for that matter, with Connors and Swinson, I think that really the sky's the limit for this offense, and what it can accomplish. And again, you can just go down the line. You have one talented wide receiver after another. I think this ASU offense, especially with the mind trust of Ken Dillingham and Bo Baldwin, is going to be a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, we talked about in the defensive segment about cornerback perhaps being the best or the deepest position group, and I think corner is, but only slightly more than wide receiver. And I think if Jake Smith is eligible this year, that makes him jump up. But I mean, a lot of quality targets for whatever quarterback ultimately wins this job.
So a tight end, I'm racking my brain, and I honestly don't think that I can remember a year where there's as much expected out of the tight ends as this. Even back to the Chris Coyle and the Zach Miller days before him, between a top-level All-America candidate, first day, quote-unquote, NFL potential pick in Conyers, and one's behind him that can play at a level that's not terribly far off. I cannot think of a time where there's been that, again, the high-end potential and the depth. That said, again, kind of like the running back, I'm not trying too much to compare to previous coaching staffs, but we have been fooled many times by expecting widespread productivity out of the tight end group. How is that actually going to materialize? There's a ton of hype about not only Messiah Swinson, but Pierre as well. What do you think we were actually going to see? Because we've seen a lot of cases, tight end certainly, but even other groups where the thought process is really, in the clouds when the preseason is around, but then the season goes by, and a guy that you were thinking was going to catch 20, 30, 40 balls catches 8 passes. How do we see the whole thing shaping up?
I think it's going to be like if Conyers doesn't get 50 plus receptions and maybe 70, 80, 90 targets, whatever. I mean, that's dereliction of duty by Bo Baldwin. I mean, this is a group you got to feed. I mean, Bryce Pierre is a guy that Jason Mons told me is an NFL guy, and he's right now 3rd on this depth chart. Conyers obviously is a day 2, maybe plays himself into a day 1 NFL draft pick. Besides Swinson, you can't teach that frame. Consistency, I thought, was his downfall, or held him back last year. Much better in that area. Still some times where I think that he's not necessarily using that size to its fullest ability, but making strides. And so obviously this is a group that I think is pretty damn loaded. And obviously, yeah, I think, but when you got like one of the best unsung weapons in the country, because I think, outside of maybe the Pac-12 footprint, people don't know who Jalen Conyers is. But I mean, Caleb, how do you see this kind of playing out?
It's really interesting. I mean, for Jalen in particular, I think he's put himself in a position not only on the field, but he's very outspoken, he's very energetic, where I think because of that, a lot of people expect a lot out of him. In terms of a group, though, I mean, expectations are high, but I think they all kind of have. I mean, I would say Jalen and Bryce are a little bit more more on the pass catching side. But I think from what I've seen, without getting too much into specifics in practice, is that I feel like this is a group that can really meet that potential in terms of talk about red zone usage. I think that's going to be huge. But I mean, even just over the middle, I mean, these are guys with some serious frames, and Jalen has shown in last year that he can climb the ladder a bit to get a ball, and you can't teach that frame that Swinson has, but it's something that I think is a little interesting to me is in terms of just, I think Messiah Swinson in particular is a little bit different, just in at least in the last week when I've really tried to home in on what these guys kind of bring into the table. Is Messiah is a great blocker in terms of his fundamentals when it comes to kind of like blocking, and where I think it's going to come down to scheme with a lot of these guys. Bryce Pierre and Jalen Conyers are more of like that pass catching, kind of like that sort of seam threat. But I think a lot of these guys are going to be schemed in certain ways where it's like you might see Conyers there and you're going to kind of maybe leave a safety over the middle to see if something happens, but then he's going to be blocking, and then you have I want to say it's 6'7" frame that Messiah Swinson has, where then he's going to be the one over the middle and maybe not blocking. So I think it's going to really be interesting in terms of how they're schemed, and that's how the usage will kind of play out. But in terms of just overall kind of expectations for the group, I don't think that I think they're high, but if they're schemed the right way and the players come to show up and Bo Baldwin chooses to use them in a particular way, I think it's a group that can definitely meet the expectations.
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that the coaches are going to use the tight ends more. And we already saw that last year, even in a very limited capacity with Jalen Conyers absolutely blossoming when Trent Bourget, his roommate, by the way, was named the starting quarterback. There's no way that Conyers is going to be even the slightest handcuff. So I know ASU fans have been burned in the past about the running back by committee, and I know they've been burned in the past about, the tight end is going to be a bigger part of the passing offense, but it's definitely going to happen. I mean, just again, you look at what Conyers did last year. You look at what Kenny Dillingham did as an offensive coordinator in Oregon, the tight end production over there. You got Jason Mons, which it's just amazing to see that guy every day in practice acting like he's like a 20-year college coach. And that's somebody that just finally came out of the high school ranks this past year.
The attention to detail he does, and just like the technician that he is in teaching these guys, is something we haven't seen here in a while.
I mean, if any Saguaro football fan is listening right now, you have no idea how blessed you were to have a college coach as a head coach in Saguaro for like up teen years. And obviously you do have a lot of banners to show for it, so it definitely wasn't a waste of time for anybody. But just amazing to see that Jason Mons in action. I mean, again, just first year as a college coach, it just really blows your mind. In other words, there's just so many aspects in play over here to not think that this tight end group is definitely going to be an integral part of this offense, and there's going to be some actions, be behind those words. And Jalen Conyers, turning in an all Pac-12 performance, I think is one of the safer bets you could make out there. And like I said, Messiah Swinson, being a great blocker, but somebody that can also be a matchup nightmare down the field. And Bryce Pierre, I think Jason Mons told you, Brad, that he is a Sunday player, and when it's all said and done, he is quote unquote only the third tight end on his depth chart. So the talent is off the charts, and this is an ASU offense is going to utilize as many different weapons as possible. So there's no need to force feed the ball to Elijah Badger, to Xavier Guillory, to any of the other wide receivers when you have such a great group of tight ends at your disposal.
Yeah, quickly adding something to Jason Mons' credit is, and Saga Tuitele, to add is how they've kind of worked in conjunction, working together, where I'm very curious to see how the tackle / tight end play, kind of evolves, actually going up against the different schemes and different defensive fronts. So I would say start setting some expectations for the run games, especially blocking out of tight ends as well.
So final question for the offensive line. I don't think anyone will, as it is right now, label it a strength of the team. So is it closer to being just kind of an average group, not great, not bad? Or is it closer to being a liability? And if it is a liability, or at least closer to that, what needs to happen to prevent that from being the case?
I don't know if I would label it as a liability. I hate to go back to the TBD term, but I think that is also applicable over here with the offensive line. I mean, you look at left tackle, and Isaiah Glass, the returning starter, is still battling Bram Walton, the transfer from Oregon, who talk about Suara, did prep locally in the Valley at that high school. So just to have like the left tackle this close to the season opener, not quite settled, is not to be not to get a word salad over here, but not really settling thought, or maybe it's an unsettling thought, I should say. Sienna Finau, the transfer for Purdue, I think is pretty well established at left guard, and I think that really was the plan for him when he did join Arizona State. Lee Fontenot on the center at center, I think is the best offensive lineman period on the team. The transfer from UNLV. Another guy that you just look and scratch your head. I mean, how was a player with that much talent at a G5 program for all those years? I mean, this is a legit Pac-12 offensive lineman. What happens at right guard? I think we're probably going to see Joey Ramos, nail down that position, and right tackle we'll see Emmett Boley. Even though we thought that Aaron Frost, the transfer from Nevada, was really going to be the starting right tackle over Boley, but Aaron Frost, as we know, was rehabbing from his ACL in spring practice, so didn't do much there. And maybe it's lingering effects from that they're showing up in fall camp that haven't allowed him to run consistently on the first team. And when he does run on the first team, ironically, he's lining up at guard, whether right guard or left guard, rather than lining up at right tackle. So I think there's pretty good talent over there. Just the fact that it's not quite settled yet, this close to season opener, is somewhat of a warning sign. I mean, you can definitely look at other positions on the CSU team that are definitely in more dire straits, if you will, than the offensive line. But to say that this is a group that's really brimming with confidence and not really causing the coaches any sleepless nights, I don't know if I would go that far.
Yeah, I put the offensive line top of my concern list right now, just because I do realize that some guys are banged up, and that's been the cause of some of the shuffling, but also the performance has just not been as consistent as I would like to see. Now that kind of maybe goes back to the point in our earlier defensive conversation of just like how much of the defensive or the pass rush success is their skill and their ability versus maybe some struggles on the offensive line. I guess we'll see when they start, going after people in different colors. But I'm just, I do agree with you. Lee Fatanu has been fantastic at center. The left tackle is still a concern. I think, Joe had Isaiah Glass number 2. I had him at number 1 in terms of our most important player list in terms of like a guy who kind of needs to step up and answer the bell. And right now we don't know because Bram Walton's been making that push, and we're, a week away from, a little over a week away from game time. You'd like to have that blind side kind of locked down as of yet, but and then of course the right Emmett Boley's kind of risen to that challenge a little bit, but we'll see like Aaron Frost, who's if he's able to kind of find his groove and get out there on a consistent basis. Guy who's previously had guard and tackle experience in his career at Nevada, so maybe that's some versatility there. Maybe they're trying some things out, or we'll see exactly what happens. But I mean, what have you seen from the O line, Caleb, especially going after day in and day out, they do have their hands full with an aggressive front of Brian Ward and his defense.
No, absolutely. And I think over the last, I'd say like week or two, I think the interior, just center to guard has really solidified. And I feel like, I've kind of seen a bit of some strides taken in terms of kind of the running game within the interior. And I know we kind of made that point earlier where the interior defensive lineman might be kind of their kind of weak area, but there was at the beginning of fall camp, especially, there was definitely some questions like, oh man, like, are we really going to get some serious pressure in the backfield? And but I think it's as it's solidified, it's really kind of gained ground, figuratively speaking, but also But I think with Isaiah Glass and Bram Walden, as much as you'd like to see that kind of, like Code said, a little bit more solidified, and like what you said, Brad, a little bit more solidified. I think that, are they kind of high on my list in terms of like, am I worried? Yes, but if I've seen anything from Coach Tuitele and how he's handled things and how the offensive line has slowly kind of progressed over fall, I'm hoping that when you kind of get, either Walden or Glass, I think Boley's kind of solidified his spot, and we'll see, what happens with Aaron Frost. But I think once you get more of that, solid core, you're going to see a little bit more stride. Again, people are banged up. People are, just getting switched out a little bit here and there. My hope is that they kind of start getting things solidified. I think that's what's going to happen. I think right now, I think they might be using Bram Walden as kind of like a wake-up call for Isaiah Glass to kind of get things going. I think there was one practice at Camp T where me and you, Brad, were standing right there under the goalpost, and I think, Glass had like 2 false starts in a series or something like that, and that's just something like that you just really don't want to see. But
and then like 2 or 3 more in that Monday, infamous Monday practice.
It was just, so I don't know if they're in their minds, Glass is the guy they want to go to, and they're putting Walden right there. Like, dude, if you keep like going like this, there's another guy to take your spot right there. He'll slide right in like he has been, the last couple of weeks. So I'm a little bit concerned. I'm sure you're going to go up against, I haven't really looked at it in depthly, against some decent pass rushes. And I'm, the name of the game of being a defensive coordinator nowadays is just to be very aggressive. And we'll see how that, that kind of exterior moves, especially at that left tackle spot. But it's high on my priority list in terms of things I need to address. But I'm hoping again that if once they get things solidified, Hode said it, TBD. As much as we hate to use it, it's just how things are going to go sometimes.
All right. So just as we did to close out the defense, let's tell everybody our confidence level in the offense. Now, again, our 1, don't have any confidence in this unit. 10, you're extremely confident. You put your life on line that this is going to be a good offense. All right, Caleb, how confident?
We're switching it
It
then.
was that way.
Because I did a high number of concern.
Oh, it's confidence. So I guess
defense, yeah.
Okay. So yeah.
So 1 being I'm not, or 1 being I am confident.
1 being no confidence.
Okay,
because you gave I remember you gave a 6 and you were kind of a 7
Okay,
in terms of like feeling good about the
Yeah.
So
oh man, I think
I answered it wrong. Whatever.
I would say right now I'm probably at around, I'd say about an 8. Maybe 7.5, depending on maybe what I see at practice.
So more confident in the offense than the defense.
I would say so. Actually, when you put it that way, it's a little tough. But as we've kind of kept talking,
not to talk you out of your answer or anything.
Yeah, sorry if I'm coming off as a hypocrite to some of the listeners, but then in that sense, I'll put it maybe at a 7.5 the more I talk about it, just because the interior linemen, I feel like, have really stepped up. The tackle position is my main area of concern. I think the quarterback battle in itself is obviously a tough question for everybody to answer. But I think, again, when they kind of solidify who they're going to go with, I think they'll take the next step in terms of chemistry. As I've noticed in practice, the route combinations are looking well. Coach Dillingham is just kind of going over where to get their splits based on the ball placement, right hash, left hash. They're going over a lot of the minute things that you'd like to go over now that you're getting closer to kind of game prep. And then the running backs, we talked about it very deep. The wide receivers, pretty deep, and then very talented, and they're, there's a lot of size. Where when you put any of the quarterbacks, let's just say all 3 in this case, with a lot of these weapons, I mean, if there is not a lot of success, then I'm going to look at the quarterback. And then, like Joe said, you might look at somebody maybe coming in about week 4, week 5. But I think if that exterior line gets solidified, and there's going to be a quarterback named next week, I'm assuming, then I think they're going to be okay. And I think that there you can only go up so much. You can only go up from last year in a lot of cases. So I think that's why, as weird as it sounds, I kind of put my confidence a little higher.
Kenny Dillingham said that in his offense, if the quarterback is sacked, it's on the quarterback and not on the offensive line. So maybe that statement in a vacuum should tell you, like, well, if ASU's offensive line is just okay, I mean, not lights out, but you have a good quarterback there behind center. You definitely have plenty of skilled players to get the job done. Then maybe you can, quote unquote, get away with an average offensive line as long as everything else is intact. And I believe everything else is intact. I'll still be maybe somewhat conservative in my optimism and go a 7.5, because if the offensive line is really just going to be a turnstile of bodies, then that cannot be good news at all for ASU. But it's just hard not to be optimistic when there's so much talent on that side of the ball. Running back, tight end, wide receivers, obviously, and quarterback, wherever the quarterback's going to be, I think is really in a position that's is going to be very, very hard for them to fail, even if the offensive line is going to go through the difficulties. But I'll put it at 7.5 confidence level.
All right, Joe, how about you?
I'll say 6.5. It's not as significant as the defense, but there are questions to be answered. If Scadaboo is enough of the guy, let's say maybe he's not Benjamin caliber, 300 carries or what have you. How does he make the transition? I'm still not sure that we've seen in game action. I'm trying to think of the best way to word this. Trenton Bourguet at quarterback last year had some great games and then some performances that were not great. I'm not necessarily going to pin that all on him like Washington State. The defense just was destroying him, and that's not on him. Where's like the average of Trenton Bourguet? Again, because we saw the Washington, we saw the Colorado, and some other games where the performances were statistically at a high level. We saw others that weren't. So what is he on a game in, game out balance without the highs and the lows? So that's where, again, there are questions there. And if he is the QB1, is that going to remain in place? We've seen how quarterback quandaries can affect a team. It can affect a team just from a morale perspective. So that's something, again, one more thing to keep an eye out for as you navigate through the season. But you have those accomplished guys, different from the defense, where I said, you've got guys that have done some things, but not necessarily on a season-wide scale. With what Conyers and Badger did last year, that's a ton of confidence in them as individuals. So, again, the offensive line really sways it down. If there was more confidence in the offensive line, I'd probably be somewhere in the 7 to 8 range. But that's really what is anchoring that, because if they don't do what they need to do, then that's really going to chip away at the quality of the offense. So, I'm cautiously optimistic about several things, but also needing to see consistency on enough things to where there are concerns.
For me, I'm going to put it right at 5, right kind of in the middle, because I think that there's two, like the sizzle and the steak are on opposite ends of the spectrum. The sizzle, I put, the playmakers at like a 9, because as we talk about, the wide receivers are really good. Tight ends, really good. Running backs, really deep. And those are great things to have, but ultimately it obviously comes down to line play and how good your quarterback is. And we've seen some uneven quarterback performances. And to Joe's point, we don't know necessarily where Bourguet is kind of, with, competency around him on a consistent basis. Obviously last year was a roller coaster. And of course, this offensive line, are they going to be good enough in the trenches? And maybe is this Sun Devil defense going to be the most chaotic that they're going to face all day? And so these Saturdays are going to be kind of really, we'll see how things play out, especially when guys get healthy. But with those two critical elements kind of being in such flux versus the sizzle and the dynamic playmakers being on the opposite end of the spectrum, that brings me in the middle. So weird to say that I have less confidence in the Sun Devil defense heading into a season after what we saw last year, and especially with the offensive minds of Dillingham and Baldwin. But yeah, I'm going to put my confidence level right now in the offense at a 5 out of 10. All right, with the new season coming up, it is imperative that you get geared up in the proper way. And really, there's no better collection than the offerings from our friends at Home Field. Just as you can see, I'm pretty much in a Home Field shirt every day. So I've been a longtime fan. They make the best vintage licensed collegiate apparel, the most comfortable clothes. I mean, this nothing touches this body other than Home Field Apparel. They have an ASU collection, 24 pieces, folks. That is amazing. A lot of vintage design. They go really in depth into a school's history. But if you have some other folks in your family that are in your inner circle that are not necessarily members of Sun Devil Nation, they've got you covered too for great gift ideas. 150 licensed schools, new stuff coming out each and every week. A lot of good stuff going on. But if you have not shopped and experienced the splendor of Home Field Apparel, there's some good news for you. As a Speak of the Devils listener, we have an offer code with them as they are partners of the show. SOTD23 at checkout will get you 15% off your first order at homefieldapparel.com. So head on over, get yourself some amazing new Sun Devil gear. Get ready for the season. I personally recommend the Stomp the Bus tee. It is fantastic. The offer code SOTD23 at checkout at homefieldapparel.com gets you 15% off. All right. So now we've talked about the offense. We've talked about the defense. Let's talk about some big picture stuff, some kind of state of the program, state of the season type stuff. Let's start things off here, guys. I'm going to throw this out to you. Obviously, ASU has undergone a significant overhaul since last season, and for good reason. Basically, kind of tear it down to the studs. The roster has been turned over. The coaching staff almost completely turned over as well. Now, the sanctions from the NCAA still lingering in some form or fashion. Obviously, the drama of the conference and the present and the future is still, or was a major factor. Now, obviously, with all these factors kind of put together, do you think this is a year zero for Kenny Dillingham in terms of, is this kind of like barring a total collapse, a kind of free pass year, just knowing that there was so much work to be done, so much of this rebuild that needed to happen, that really 2024, perhaps even with the new conference, is when we can start to put together some kind of judgments and, figuring out how this Sun Devil renovation project is going.
Yeah, absolutely. Kenny Dillingham is definitely in the honeymoon period. There's no doubt about that. I mean, even if it ends up being a losing record, and maybe not a whole lot better of a record than it was last year, I don't think that fans will be calling for Dillingham's head or anything like that. They know that a lot of patience has to be exercised. Like you said, there's unfortunately a lot of circumstances that are lingering from last year, circumstances that still might affect the program in the future, namely the NCAA sanctions. So absolutely, Dillingham does get a free pass, and there's no reason to really be in a state of despair if you're an ASU fan if this team doesn't do a whole lot better than it did last year.
I'd have to agree. I mean, I just think about the current landscape of college football, and as much as kind of, Kenny's somewhat on the forefront of it all, and him and Coach Samples and everything, and how, the Texas to Tempe stuff. But, all that aside, again, I agree, just because last year the Pac, I mean, even then, Oregon State, USC, Washington, Utah, I mean, there's some powerhouses that you're going to have to face just year one. I didn't even mention Oregon, and just like Coach said, the work that needed to be done. And granted, if you ask Kenny if it's year zero, he's going to say no. Just that's I haven't had any conversations with Kenny really, but from what I've witnessed and how I, look at him, it's not like that to him. But if you are a real Sun Devil fan, in my opinion, it's going to take time, and you'd have to have patience. But and as much as Kenny might not see it that way, I think, just considering all the circumstances involved, I think good season, not so good season, that there's you're kind of like, all right, let's 2024 can hopefully will be better.
All right, Joe, what do you think? Is this a situation where this year doesn't count on the evaluation period, or is, this kind of, prove it or else type of day and age? It's kind of does he have to hit the ground running?
With all due respect to our wonderful guests here, whom I admire and think the world of, I'm going to completely disagree with what they both just said. And it's under the thought process of, should this, what they just said, be true? Yes, by all means. Will it? I don't believe so. If ASU wins 3 or 4 games, yes, the fans aren't going to be calling for Kenny Dillingham to lose his job, but 1 year from right now, there are going to be a lot of pissed off people. And you have to think about the function of everything that's going on in the conference, and obviously ASU's moved to a new conference. If ASU wins 3 or 4 games and Colorado wins 6 or 7 in year one under Deion Sanders, that's going to piss off this fan base. If ASU wins 3 or 4 games, or if it wins 5 games and loses to Arizona, not only to lose the Territorial Cup for the second straight year, but to miss a bowl game. And if Arizona continues this little bit of an ascent that I think, because they're kind of this weird favorite team. I've said this on multiple occasions of people who have no interest in the Pac-12. Arizona seems to be kind of a popular team among them. If that ascension continues, and let's say they go 6-6 and go to a bowl game and keep the Territorial Cup for the Wildcats, that's not a good thing. And that obviously impacts ASU's season. If you're talking about looking toward the future with going into the Big 12 and having confidence going into that part of the country, and yes, I know the argument can be made if you're looking at what the Pac-12 is this year and what will be in the Big 12 next year. This year's Pac-12 might be a more challenging conference. But if ASU doesn't hit the ground running to an extent, I think the fan base is going to be pretty upset. And a lot of this, what I'm saying right now, is kind of a indictment of the fickleness of the fan base. It is what it is. If you have 6 or 7 wins across a 2-year span, I mean, 6 to 7 wins is something that is usually in range with what ASU does in a 1-year span of winning football games, and that's not really that big of an accomplishment. So if you don't see them get to right at that doorstep of bowl eligibility, unless you have a slew of injuries and heartbreaking losses and things to where it's like, hey, the record may not have been quite what it really was. I think there's just going to be some disgruntled nature about things, whether that's fair or not, whether that's right or not. I think that will be a case. I just have a hard time visualizing an outcome where ASU goes 3-9 or 4-8 and does it in kind of a predictable fashion, doesn't win the Territorial Cup back again, doesn't upset in Oregon or USC or something like that. I have a hard time thinking that the fan base and all of the narratives as ASU enters the Big 12 in 2024 and beyond are going to be, that was just the head coach's first year. It was a major rebuild. Give them slack. And even though I kind of say that in jest, again, I totally get that and agree that yes, it should be a year of patience. This should be a multi-year type of project to get to the point where ASU is back in a positive direction. As I said earlier, it is a major accomplishment to improve your record by more than just a couple games. For ASU in this conference in general, I think sometimes folks just don't see the forest for the trees, and that going from 3 wins to even 7 is a pretty Herculean accomplishment. So all these things considered, the nature of college sports, the nature of college football, I just don't think that the patience is there for what happened last year, anything near it, to happen again, whether that's right or wrong, because that's the questions. Obviously, there is a lot of positivity with Kenny Dillingham as head coach. The questions that people had about him, lack of experience, age, that sort of thing, those are going to become screaming topics if this season is not something where there is more positivity than a repeat of last year. So like I said, I'm not saying it's right, I'm not saying it's fair, but I think that there is less of a margin for error than some may choose to believe.
Yeah, I think that I agree with Joe in terms of, yes, it should be a year 0, because this is a situation where like the rot was in the walls and you just had to tear the whole damn thing down. And Kenny Dillingham basically has. He kept the couple of the great work to keep the gems and like Conyers, a Badger, and some of those things, the foundational pieces. But for the most part, really starting to see, again, thanks to the NCAA suspension of that rule, a lot of new faces here. And, we're going to probably see the same thing, maybe not to the extent, but a lot of new faces again next year as this program is kind of reshaped in that image. Now, I do think it's going to be kind of vibes based, if that makes any sense, in terms of like, as you mentioned, Caleb, that's a pretty daunting schedule, especially during the back half of the year. Even some difficult, non-con games, even though they are at home, and you do have 8 home games total. but it's a really difficult schedule and daunting. Now, I do think that, you know, a 3-9, 4-8 would piss a lot of people off, but it might be just how those 8, 3 or 4 wins perhaps come together. If they're really competitive, just kind of missing out and some weird ASU type stuff happens, because it's ASU, always something university. Weird things tend to happen. And maybe the Pac-12 after dark goes out with a just ultimate weirdness. Who knows? But, you know, just if you kind of, I think I remember talking about this in terms of the late Todd Graham years of just like, not all 7-5s are created equal, because there was a very disappointing 7-5. And then also kind of that 2017, you sense kind of an upward trend, even though it wasn't upward enough. So I do think that kind of, you know, how this team is performing. They're going out there, they're raising hell, and they're just you know, the first year in a rebuild, and they're just not quite talented or deep enough. We talked about some of the key areas which that depth could really come back to bite them over the course of a long, grueling Pac-12 season. I think that, you know, the fan base is fickle, as Joe pointed out. We've talked about it a lot, and so there could be some situations there. But I think overall, you know, barring just a complete total collapse, which I don't see yet, because I think like the end of 2016 is kind of an example where that team just kind of really kind of just, I don't want to say quit, but like you could tell the effort perhaps wasn't to the level that this first year team I think is going to be light years ahead of that. They seem bought in, revitalized, re-energized the fan base as well. It's going to be a difficult season in a lot of ways, but I think that if they're able to kind of continue the trend, be competitive on a day in day out basis, be a difficult out for some of the better teams. If, you know, they make, you know, even though they might fall short to a USC and Oregon or Washington, but if they make them work for it, and then you take care of some of the games that you're supposed to take care of, and most importantly, get a dub over the University of Arizona, I think that should be a pretty good situation overall that fans would be happy with. And then you turn the page to 2024 and kind of maybe a true year one. Maybe you're in a good spot going to the Big 12.
So my big picture question, generally similar in nature, qualitatively and quantitatively, what creates a successful season this year?
I don't know. I think the low-hanging fruit answer would be just 6-6 and making a bowl game. And I guess to your point, Joey, maybe the cherry on top is making a bowl game while denying U of A bowl game, which I guess could be a likely scenario out there. But yeah, I mean, that would be a sign of progress of just doubling your win total from last year, being in a post-game scenario for first-year head coach. I mean, I'm not saying it's something that you should throw a parade down Mill Avenue if that did take place. But like I always say, you know, baby steps are okay as long as they're baby steps in the right direction and do set you up for more success in years to come. So 6-6, I think that's a record that would be pleasing under the circumstances for ASU fans, and again would probably avoid a loss to Arizona and maybe some other embarrassing, inexplicable losses along the road.
I think for me, I think what kind of makes it, what would kind of differentiate it between kind of what Brad said, it's like it's either 7-5 good or kind of 7-5 bad, and you know, I kind of agree with Hode where it might be 6-6, but I think honestly, we talk about kind of like the buy year, and I think what for me, in my thought process, what would make the difference is like you have to beat U of A, and you have to get the territorial cutback at home, you know, and like Brad said, I think some of that Arizona State weirdness, you know, the weirdness in the desert, if you will, it will, you know, if you get kind of a signature win, you beat U of A, and some of those games where you're probably like 2 touchdown, you know, the other team is 2 touchdown favorites, and you kind of make them work for it. I mean, as much as you don't want to see maybe 3, 4, 5 wins, I think it's like if you make the good teams work for it, you beat U of A, and like you just kind of show some really good progress that hopefully Dillingham makes a little bit more than what Graham did, then that's kind of what's gonna maybe like everybody can maybe loosen their belt a little bit, if you will. So I think that would be my answer to that.
All right, I'm going to say, yeah, I agree with you. Like, number one, you got to beat U of A. They can't have a cup for 2 years in a row. After that, again, I kind of default to kind of the vibes. How does this team look over the course of those 3 months? You know, are they still, you know, the baseline competitiveness and the effort has got to be there, but are they getting better incrementally week in and week out. There's a lot of new faces and a lot of young guys, and a lot of young guys that will be key parts of the future of this program. Are they getting better each and every week? Are you setting yourself up for failure or for success in the future? And actually, I sat down with Kenny Dillingham today, asked him kind of question: what is your definition of success in year one? And he said that one of the things that, to tease ahead, that he's never going to put a number to it. He's never going to say that it's going to be X number of wins to find success. It's going to be more of those intangible things. And I think in this first season and the Activate the Valley era, it's going to be completely in, like, other than the cup. You got to get the cup. Just full stop. Get the cup back. But then after that, it's just kind of those intangible things. Are you feeling good? Just kind of, those kind of qualitative things. Are you feeling good about the direction? Do you see the young players coming together? Do you see this team picking off, maybe as ASU tends to do about it once every season, take down a ranked team they have no business of taking down? Some weird things happen between the buttes, but just is that trajectory setting themselves up for kind of this upcoming off season of another round of just kind of reshuffling this roster, getting some more of Kenny Dillingham's guys in here and reshaping this roster. These things continue to come together. I think that's what success will look like rather than any kind of a win total.
Yeah, I think for me, kind of going back and forth in my head, I think there can be some encouragement if you win 5 games and one of them is beating Arizona, especially if Arizona does not go to a bowl game. If the result of the Arizona game is a loss, then I think ASU needs to be in a bowl game even with that loss. Yeah. So those, as far as we're talking kind of win totals, which I know we'll go into detail about, I think those are that kind of outcome. For me, on more of the generally qualitative scale, shoring up the defense, getting that pass rush activated, having the run defense be nowhere near as bad as it was last year, so you have steps of progress. And then on offense, just make the right decisions and have those decisions be proven right at quarterback. Obviously, there are a few names that are all pretty encouraging right now, but you'd hate to see a circumstance where, okay, Trenton Bourguet goes in, doesn't play particularly well, and then then Drew Pine, he's healthy, he comes in, doesn't do particularly well. You burn a red shirt for Jaden Rashada to play in a little bit more than 4 games, to where, at the end of the year, you've cycled through these quarterbacks and you still aren't in a much better position than you were as far as depth chart is concerned, and the season win total didn't get you much. I know there's like a doomsday scenario I'm outlining, but that would be that. And it's not impossible for that to be the case. So if it is Trenton Bourguet, I'm not necessarily saying that the starter needs to start every single game, but just make sound decisions. I know last year was there were seemingly countless errors and mistakes and things you can point at as being negative. But within this context, I think about that Stanford game, and Emory Jones had no business starting that Stanford game. And if Trenton Bourguet starts that Stanford game, I believe ASU wins that with relative ease. Now, granted, that wouldn't have moved the needle too much in the season as a whole, but that's an example of the kind of things that cannot happen this year and have it be considered a success. So I think part of it is win total, but there's some flexibility there. And yeah, you got to beat Arizona, because the fact is Arizona has not won in Sun Devil Stadium since 2011.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, before last year, you only had that one miserable loss in 2016 that basically took you from, 7-8 years worth of wins. And even the ones that was a loss was to a very good, not going to give them respect very often. That 2014 Wildcat team was pretty solid. It was a close game that ASU lost. So fans are not used, especially fans that are maybe a decade or less in terms of their allegiance to ASU, simply not used to seeing ASU lose consecutive football games to the University of Arizona. So there's a lot riding on that, as we all know.
Ready?
As I'm sure you've heard in our last couple episodes, we are partnered up this year with some new sponsors, one of which, Burrito Express, a family-owned business that began in 1995. The combination of authentic recipes, competitive prices, and a comfortable atmosphere makes dining with Burrito Express a unique experience. You've seen their passion on Twitter. You've seen how incredibly active they have been for a few years now in supporting Sun Devil student athletes with a multitude of NIL deals. Saw it last weekend. I was one of many who stopped by to check out the event that they had. Trenton Coben Bourguet, Jalen Conyers, Elijah Badger, Rylan Bourguet were out there. It was an awesome deal. So it's safe to say, if you're part of the Sun Devil family, which you surely are, Burrito Express is a business well worth your support. And by the way, the food is awesome as well. Burrito Express has 6 Valley locations, 2 in Gilbert, 1 in Mesa, 1 in Chandler, 1 in Scottsdale, and the Tempe location near Rural and University, just about a half mile from Sun Devil Stadium. They're open 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. Monday through Friday, while some locations are open as early as 6 a.m. during the week and 8 to 3 on Saturdays and Sundays. So you can get a little something as you're heading out to the tailgates, or get a little something in you to begin the day when game day's creeping up, which it surely is. You can order online at theburritoexpress.com for pickup or delivery, and be sure to give them a follow on Twitter and Instagram at BurritoEXP and on TikTok at BurritoExpressAZ.
Now, one of the I think the best testaments to the quality of Burrito Express is Jalen Conyers. Yeah, he gets his burritos there, doesn't use salsa, which is kind of wild. He says they're so good they don't need salsa. Now, I'm very pro salsa. Their salsa is delicious, but that's just a testament to the quality of the burritos at Burrito Express. Definitely check them out. They do great work, and I pretty much stop there like almost after every practice covered. All right, so we are in the home stretch here. It is time to put ourselves on the line, gentlemen. We're going to be putting our season predictions in a number of stat categories, win-loss record, and a bunch of other kind of crazy stuff as well. We're going to put it on a spreadsheet. We're going to make it, we're going to be accountable, as we often do. All right, so let's start things off here. You guys will need to name the rushing leader on this team and whether you think that individual is over under the 800 rushing yards mark. Caleb, what do you say?
I'll stick with the one, Cam Scattaboo, but I'm gonna say he's gonna go under. And I need to give you a number?
Or maybe reasons why you think.
I'm putting my faith in that it really is gonna be running back by committee, and I just think it just a lot of guys are gonna get touches, and it's not. And do I think Cam is not able to get over 800? No, I just think it's just the setup of the running back group right now.
All right, Hode.
Yeah, I can't disagree with Caleb at all. I just think that the running back committee is definitely going to happen, and that's the only reason why Scatabo is not going to get over 800 yards, but it'll definitely be a significant aspect of this offense. But when we talk about the games being shorter and the stats not being as gaudy as they were in years past, that not only applies to the quarterbacks and wide receivers, also applies to the running backs. So that's why I think Scatabo definitely leading rusher, but less than 800 yards.
All right, Joe, what do you think?
I'll go with Scatabo as well. For the sake of variety, I'll go over, but not by much. I'm not saying like 1,000-yard year, somewhere in the low 800s.
Yeah, I'm thinking that too. I think Scat, obviously, I think he gets like 850 with probably another 300-400 receiving and like, again, 10 total touchdowns. This guy's a beast, but I think that this might be the year we see more type of Oregon depth. You might have a couple guys, in the mid, like 400 to 500, 600-yard range. All right, gentlemen, over under on team total rushing yards. Over under is 2,000 yards, and a mark that AC fell short of last year.
I'll say over.
Over?
I'll go over. I just think if they can figure out at the line, and if with how much teams are going to put an emphasis on the air game with the weapons, I think the running back group can excel.
How about you, Hod?
Elijah Badger and those end routes. Yeah. That by itself is going to put him over 2,000. But yeah, just way too much talent, way too much weapons for this offense not to register more than 2,000 rushing yards.
I'm going to go under. I mean, I feel like I'm just doing things for the sake of, going the opposite direction, but it's just kind of a math deal for me. If I'm saying that Cam Scattaboo is going to have in the low 800s, okay, then that's 1,100 to work with. And yes, I agree that the backups will get a few hundred themselves. The X factor in this is that you're probably not going to have a quarterback that's going to be running for a lot of yards, as you saw, maybe with the Jaden Daniels and the like. So I think that just adds up. To me, like, I can't say that Cam Scattaboo is going to have low 800s and then think that the team's going to have over 2,000, because I think that would take a lot of contributions. So I'm going to say under.
I'm going to say over, because I do think that there's going to be a lot, and I think the quarterbacks will get out there. Bourguet's got 2 healthy feet now. That could be interesting. Also, Rashada as well. I do think that, just the rushing yards total, because this is a team that likes to run the ball a lot, or an offense that wants to run the ball a lot. My only question is, is the offensive line up to the challenge? I think, but in some certain situations, I think they're going to be good enough, and that's going to get them there. Team passing touchdowns, over under 24.5. Caleb, start us off.
Oh man, This is a really tough one.
So we gave it to easy. Didn't have to name like the quarterback that's going to do it,
Right.
but just team total 24.5.
I'm gonna say over, and just because I think the red zone threat of the receivers is really gonna be the difference maker between the tight ends and kind of the size you have at wide receiver, where some of those like right under the goalposts, like kind of I guess you'd call like a shallow dig, or some of those back pylons like Badger, O'Meary, might become that's where they might actually find some success, passing touchdown wise.
Over, but really by a hair. But to your point, Brad, I think this team is really going to run the ball much more than fans actually going to, give them credit for. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a team that's capable of having that amount of passing touchdowns, but maybe not by a whole lot. I could see this team really just marching down deep into the red zone and just really scoring more on the ground than they would in the air. But 24.5 passing touchdowns, that's not a gaudy number, but by a hair they would pass it.
Yeah, I'll take the over slightly at 25-26 range. What folks are saying. I mean, you just got some targets between Conyers, Swinson, even Pierre, Badger. I mean, and even the running backs in the pass game. I think you've got some talented pass catchers and some versatile guys coming out of the backfield that it's just going to work its way to that.
Yeah, I'm going to say over as well. I think like Conyers is like maybe a 10, 12 touchdown guy. Guillory and Badger, I think, can be in that 6 to 8. Maybe one of them gets a double digits as well. And then you got a host of other guys. And while this is going to be a run heavy offense, I think there's going to be plenty of guys, especially in that red zone. I want to see that O'Meary, Swinson, Conyers, throwing Bryce Pierre. He's 6 foot. That's going to cause some problems. So I think they're going to get some touchdowns, even though maybe the passing yards aren't excessive. Next up, the receptions leader on this team. Who's going to catch the most passes? And is their total going to be over under 54.5?
Oh man, this another good one. In terms of leader, I'm probably gonna go with the safe bet Badger, and I really kind of hold off to that because I think defenses are really gonna zero in on him, where it's gonna make it really difficult. With that said, he'll be the leader, but it'll be under
54.5 catches.
Yeah.
All right.
I will go under, but I will go Xavier Guillory. And maybe he just edges Badger, but my gut feeling tells you that Guillory just may be the leading wide receiver.
Again, contrarian point. I'll go over, and I'll go Conyers.
I too will go over Conyers. I think Conyers breaks the record. The record's what? It's 59 by Chris Coyle.
Between 55. I think it's fewer than 60. Between 55 and 60.
Let's just see. Pull it up real quick. 57. Chris Coyle in 2012, 57 catches. I think Conyers breaks that record.
No, that's not the receiving record for a tight end, if anybody cares, as far as yardage goes.
Oh yeah, yardage 696.
I think it was Todd Heap.
But so the receptions record in this category. So yeah, I'm going to take Conyers in the over, and I'll just go say 65. Now, as Joe talked about, we've been kind of burned, in terms of just like this year the tight end's back. So cumulative touchdowns by the tight end group. Those three guys talked about, tossing Ryan Morgan. I don't know if but just those top three guys likely collectively, are they going to go over 69.5 receptions? You can get to 70.
I'm gonna say yes, just because I think just the three of them, I think, are just all gonna kind of come into their own. And if you haven't seen the Bourget to Conyers connection now, you're gonna see that plus Pierre and probably plus Swinson again, saying if Bourget gets named the starter.
I would say over too. Just way too much talent to mess that one up.
I'm just going to say under because can't have nice things. So a group that is expected to
Jedi ASU's gotten to you.
a group that's more or less expected to dominate. Like I could see, high 50s and then, mid to high 50, right on the doorstep, but something where, there's 1 to 1.5 receptions among everybody that's not Jalen Conyers when you thought it'd be more. So it's on the doorstep, but I'll just, for the heck of it, say under.
I'm going over. I mean, if I have Conyers at 65, I mean, yeah, they're gonna get fine 6 receptions between Pierre and Swinson as well. All right, so last year ASU posted a paltry 17 sacks. But they look better. they actually have a scheme that cares to bring an offense under pressure. Total team sacks over under 27.5, which going historically, just if people are curious, is a pretty solid ASU number, but not great. I mean, it's not like franchise or program record type stuff.
I'll go under. I think there's massive improvement, but I just don't think they reach it. I think they're gonna have some big sack games. I think there's a couple games in the schedule that have like a multiple. But I think a lot of like the better offensive fronts that they're gonna face are just gonna hold them back just a good bit.
Yeah, I have to say under 2. I just feel that some of the offenses that they're going to face are going to be really maybe carbon copy of ASU's offenses to really get the ball out under 3 seconds, not really give you an opportunity to sack the opposing quarterback. So I would say under, but not by much.
Yeah, I guess I'll go under. I'm kind of tossed around with that one. And that one, it's got to stick with the things I was saying where there's encouragement, but until it's really seen, you don't have someone coming back that has that, 8+ sack caliber, at least proven at the college level. So right now, yeah, it seems like it'd be a little bit too much of a leap of faith to call the over.
I'm taking that leap. I'm saying over. I like BJ Green. I like Clayton Smith. I think they're going to get after it. I think both of them are probably going to be in that 6 to 8 range. And I think just, the Coug defense, which I don't think has as much talent as this current Sun Devil defense, but the Cougs last year had 33. So I think that it's not unreasonable for ASU to get in the high 20s here. Maybe that's being a little bit more optimistic, but what we've been seeing, just this defense kind of bringing chaos from all angles and levels. I think they're going to get crazy, going to get weird, and I think that the kind of last couple of years of the disappearing pass rush are going to be behind. All right, guys, some individual defensive categories. You just got to name the player you think is going to lead in the respective categories. Tackles. Caleb, who do you think?
Oh man, that's tough. I'll go Trey Brown.
Okay, solid pick. That is my pick as well.
Trey Brown, yeah.
All right. Consensus or?
Yeah, I'll go with this. I mean, process of elimination. I just don't see a defensive lineman going above that. And, we don't really have those safeties that you think are going to get 90, 100 tackles. Jordan Simone's on walking through that door. So I'll go with Trey Brown.
All right. TFLs.
I'll go with Clayton Smith. I think that's just, yeah.
Deshaun Mallory.
Oh, all right. Getting some pressure up through the interior.
I'll say BJ Green.
I, too, will say BJ Green, which I guess, based on what I said just a few moments ago, is also my pick for sacks leader.
Which I'll agree with.
All right. What do you think, Caleb?
Part of me wants to say Clayton Smith again. I might just say Clayton Smith just to be different, but maybe my gut's telling me BJ Green, but I just want to be different. So
So it's Smith it is. All right.
Clayton Smith.
Oh, Clayton Smith. All right. All right. Interceptions. So obviously we talked about the secondary, getting after a little bit, some pretty deep. What do you think?
I think people are going to stay away from Rotorrent, so I'm going to go with Ed Woods.
Woods, good pick.
Jordan Clark.
Chris Edmonds.
All right. Variety is the spice of life because Shamari Simmons is going to do it, folks, this year. So it'll be interesting. Yeah, again, I think that maybe just speaks to the quality of the secondary if they can stay healthy out there. All right. So before we have a little break here, Dario Longetto's had a really good fall camp, showing an impressive leg. So field goals from distance have been a little hit and miss in terms of ASU in the last couple of years. So percentage of 40+ yard field goals made by ASU this year. I'm saying I like what I've seen from Longetto. I say he's going to hit from 75% of the time from deep.
I'm going to say 70.
80.
Oh, all right.
So we're only going on 40+.
Yeah.
I'll say, I guess, would it be like 67%, 2/3? Yeah.
All right. So.
Okay, cool. Let's go to size 6. Huge shout out to our wonderful friends at Spaghetti Shack. Of course, by now, not just Sun Devil owned, but owned and operated by a former Sparky, the Sun Devil. They've got 3 locations, one up in the cool temperatures of Pine Top, 2 in Tempe, including an ASU location just 1 mile from Sun Devil Stadium that's open from 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. Sunday through Thursday and 11 a.m. to midnight Fridays and Saturdays. They had their grand opening event last weekend. That was awesome. I made the stop by there. They had people literally lining up out the door waiting for the place to open. So you love to see that for an ASU-owned small business. So get in there, get your fill of spaghetti, meatball sandwiches, and more. Mondays, it's buy one meatball, get one free. I'm going to have free meatballs for a year because I got in there, and I was one of the first 200 people that got there. So even the sponsors and the partners in the sponsorships can still get fringe benefits. That's a pretty cool thing, right? So, and then Tuesdays, famous spaghetti tacos. Catering is also available, like all our sponsors. The Spaghetti Shack is deeply involved in giving back to the Sun Devil community and the Tempe community as a whole. We've been talking about that whole NIL thing with a lot of our sponsors. The theme continues with Spaghetti Shack. You might have seen last week, they reached a NIL arrangement with Will Schaefer, linebacker from Arizona State University. Great partnership there. So next time you're looking for some grub, support a small business that's owned and operated by Sun Devils. The ASU location, that new one, is 922 East Apache Boulevard. So they have their other Tempe location that I mentioned, as well as the one in Pine Top, and now the new ASU Tempe location. You can find them on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at The Spaghetti Shack, and on Twitter at Spaghetti_Shack. Check out their menu, hours, locations, and more online at thespaghettishack.com. The Spaghetti Shack, takeout for the pasta-loving people.
All right, so continuing the home stretch here of awards. Now we're going to go to breakout player. Now this is a guy that's not a newcomer, just a returning player that you think is going to take a major step forward. I'll start things off because fueled by the Spaghetti Shack, linebacker Will Schaefer is going to come into his own, have a pretty solid season, make a name for himself in the Pac-12 as a pretty damn good linebacker. All right, Caleb.
I'm going to have to go with Bryce Pierre. Just,
Mm.
just taking on an increased role. I think he's really shown a lot in fall and from what I've seen, and I think he's going to break out.
You're stealing my pick for 2024.
Wow. Breakout player.
And someone that's been here, right? Is that so?
Yeah, because we have a separate top newcomer award.
Okay.
So
Yeah, I would say Ed Woods. I think he can nail down that starting corner position opposite Ro Torrens, and as Caleb said, and I'm sure a lot of other people would agree as well. I don't see offenses really targeting Ro Torrens all that much. More opportunities for Ed Woods to shine.
This one might seem kind of obvious, but I think if you were to take it outside the landscape of the people really closely connected to the program, it's not as obvious. I'm going to say BJ Green. You think about the last 2 years. Yes, he's been ASU sack leader. Any of us in this room could have been ASU sack leader last year. And I'm not trying to knock BJ down by saying that, but just I'm saying it. And even his first year, I think he had 4.5, 5 sacks, something
he had
like
5, and then last year 2.5.
Yeah. So I mean, if we're talking about, again, I am not saying this to try to belittle what he's done at Arizona State. That's not my point. I'm just saying he didn't have Terrell Suggs caliber years, or even like a Tyler Johnson, or Will Sutton, or anybody that got these double-digit type sack years. However, that sort of thing is not impossible for this year. I think you have to expect him to get maybe at least 7-8 sacks this year. I think he could get into double digit. I think he could have those mid to high teens as far as TFLs. That would be a significant improvement from what he did in his first 2 years, even combined, let alone in any individual one of those years. He should vie for all conference honors this year. That would be a major step up from what he did. So again, he's been a great contributor. It's a great story of a guy coming from a walk-on to a scholarship player to a team leader. And there's a lot of appreciation internally, as there should be, for him. I think this is where he can take that next step, because there might not be too many people that are talking about him outside of those in Tempe or those connected to ASU. So if and when he does have a monster season or something comparable to a monster season, that might open some eyes that haven't been opened, again, outside of this immediate circle.
Yeah. All right. So now we go to the newcomers, some new face, a guy who wasn't on the roster last year. Caleb, who's going to be the best of that group?
If you're wondering why I'm only naming offensive guys, just the people that I've paid the most attention to. But in my case, I think I'm going to have to go with Melquan Stovall. I mean, just really, really, really has just been impressed with how he's, presented himself at that slot position.
I have to say Xavier Guillory, if I think is going to be the reception leader, I think best newcomer is probably an award you should get to.
I got to go Cam Scatterbo. I mean, picking him to be the leading rusher and have a very good season, even if it's not necessarily a 1,000-yard rushing season, I expect him to have over 1,000 all-purpose yards, and I don't know that there's anybody else that's going to match that level of contribution on offense or defense.
All right, I'm going to go with agree with Joe, and I think Scat. I mean, if I think he's going to have over 800 yards and probably another few hundred receiving plus 10 total touchdowns, giving it to Cam. All right, so last year's ASU offense, first half terrible, second half better, still not great. This year, will the team score more than 27.5 points per game? And for reference, last year's total, even after the second half surge, was still only 26.1. All right, who wants to start off? Caleb?
Yeah, I think they're going to be over that. I think I would probably put them more in the range of averaging about 31.
Ooh,
Yeah.
all right.
I would say around 30, so over. Yeah.
Not sure exactly where, but I'd say over, because if that was what it was last year to improve by a point or two, like if I wouldn't have known that fact, I probably would have said under, but there's just, I don't see any way that they don't improve their scoring average by enough to get over that hump.
Even though I have significant concerns about the offensive line and some questions about the quarterback, I do think the talent overall and just like you can scheme your way to some success. So I think that at minimum they're going to be clearing that bar as well. Not sure if they get to 30, but I think that they're going to be, it's going to be better, at least more pleasant looking. All right, so the defense last year, as Joe alluded to, and it's pretty bad. They went from second in scoring defense in the pack to very bad. Where do you think they're going to rank among the Pac-12 teams in terms of collective team scoring defense? I'll start off. I think fourth. I think they're going to make a significant jump because I like the edges. I like the secondary. Some questions. I think they're going to be elite. They're going to be pretty solid. They're going to be a tough out.
No, yeah, I would agree. I'd put them about like 5 to 6. Yeah, 5 to 6. About midway, made that jump.
We got to put you down to one number. We can't take a range.
Right. You know what?
Can't be cheating now.
Give them the benefit of the doubt, and I'll put them at 5th in the conference.
All right, 5th in scoring D.
I'll put them 6, smack in the middle.
All right, top half.
Yeah, I'll say 6-2. I kind of want to give them a less favorable one, but I'll go with that.
All right, so of course the schedule as we laid out got some pretty difficult stretches in it. Now, obviously, the U of A game in any given year going to be the most important one that the ASU fans have circled on the calendar. Other than the U of A game, what do you feel will be the most important game for the Devils this year? Let's start off with Hode.
This might sound like a weird answer, but I would say the Cal game because they're going to have a real tough game against USC the week before. Might not be only a loss, but pretty maybe demoralizing loss, just with the USC and their offensive capabilities. And then they got the next game. They got Colorado, which with Deion Sanders as the head coach, it's going to be a traveling circus, and the spotlight's always going to shine bright on that game. It's also the last game before their bye week, so that Cal game might be a real important contest just to rally the troops and not really be affected too much about what happened against USC the week before.
All right, Joe, what's your pick?
Kind of similar within range. I'm going Colorado. I'm not trying to make everything about the season seem like it's just this one-on-one between ASU and Colorado and Kenny Dillingham and Deion Sanders, but especially since ASU and Colorado are going to be paired into the same conference for this foreseeable future, by any means necessary, ASU has to do whatever it can to stifle Colorado's growth. Like I've been on the record many times of thinking I think the Deion Sanders experiment in Colorado is either going to go incredibly well or very poorly. I don't see it being anywhere in the middle. And if you look at the schedule for ASU, they need to win the games that they should win. There are some tough ones on the road, like Washington and Utah. Even though USC's here, there's some tough outs on the schedule that are going to take pretty massive efforts to get wins in those games. So when you have ones like Colorado, you've got to pick up the victory. And again, just kind of for the qualitative side of it, the fan base. If you lose to Colorado, then you're going to have people saying, ASU should have hired Deion Sanders, that sort of thing. Conversely, you get the win, that changes that narrative. And as you mentioned, that goes into the bye week. You get a win there, you should have a winning record and possibly a fairly decent one at that. If you lose that game, you go into the bye, then you face that tough stretch. So again, it's a critical game that's going to have a lot of national headlines. It is such a good thing that was not bumped to what would be this weekend, right? It was supposed to be, they were talking
Week
about
zero.
it, week 0 game. That would have been that would have done no good for ASU and all the good for Colorado. So huge game.
I'm gonna, as much as I kind of want to say Oklahoma State just to set the tone for the season, I'm gonna have to go. I think I'm on the same wavelength as Joe, where you don't want to make it like Dillingham versus Sanders, but they're both in the new coaching, taking over a rough program kind of situation where Sanders did the Sanders thing and did it his way, and I feel like, you know, Kenny's not the same name as Dion, of course, but he's also handled it not the Dion way, and rightly so. And I think, like Joe said, it kind of gets rid of that narrative if ASU wins, kind of like second fiddle to Colorado moving forward and joining the Big 12, where I think this can just be that really big statement game for Kenny as a head coach, you know. So Colorado.
I'm gonna go a different way, and I think like there's gonna be 2 true coin flip games on the schedule this year: home against Wazoo, at UCLA. And I think kind of the results of those 2 games are kind of going to determine ASU if they have a postseason fate at all. And I do think that UCLA is going to be the kind of the bellwether game, being given that edge because it's on the road. It's going to be the second game of a kind of that brutal like road. You go to Utah the week before, and then facing the Bruins before 2 at home. I think a lot's going to ride on that. So I'm going to give that game kind of, you know, how they're going to be. We're going to have a good sense of the team, but how are they going to be able to finish strong in that final 3-week stretch? That's of course going to culminate in the U of A game. All right, so now we'll get to the final record here in a moment, but along the way, what is going to be the biggest win for the Sun Devils in 2023? Hode, start us off.
Biggest win. I think it'll be UCLA on the road, and I don't think UCLA this year is nearly as good as it was last year. And maybe a lot of pundits are giving them the benefit of the doubt because Chip Kelly happens to be the head coach, that they can still come close to 9 wins, if not duplicating it. But it's a game that I think ASU is going to be an underdog, and I don't think they should be an underdog. They should not be a heavy underdog, and it's a much more winnable road game than people might give it credit to.
Caleb, what do you think?
I'm gonna go for, I think they might pull it off against Oregon at home. I just think it's a very big emotional game for sort of the players and how they've bought in with Coach Dillingham, and I don't think Coach Dillingham has any sort of malice in his body for Oregon. But you know, when you leave a job for another one, and you know everybody kind of wants to like stick it to their old employer. I mean, me and Chipotle. But you know, it's just
Burrito Express.
yeah. But yeah, I talk about that Tempe magic, and you know, we've seen it with Oregon in the past, and
Ranked win at home.
ranked win at home.
In November.
I'm
Weird
sure it'll
thing.
still be warmer in Tempe than it is in Eugene and stuff. There's a million different things that can play in. And for some reason, you know, they might come off a win at UCLA, or they finally come home for the last 2 maybe after a loss at UCLA, and you know, they want a good amount of energy going into the rivalry game.
So all games are fair game.
All games are fair game.
So I'm not necessarily predicting one of those classic ASU to beat someone that they shouldn't really beat, or at least not on a top 10, top 15 caliber team. So I'm going to go with Arizona, because to me that is going to be the game that obviously brings the Territorial Cup back to Tempe in the first try under Kenny Dillingham, which is a huge deal in itself. And then to be a bit of a spoiler alert, it'll be that win that gets ASU into a bowl game. So you put those 2 things together, I don't see any game of the ones that I predict ASU to win that carry anywhere near that combined magnitude.
I agree. Arizona's going to be the biggest win, and Kenny Dillingham's a Sun Devil. He's a Valley native. He knows the value and importance of this rivalry and winning that one, and especially with an ascendant Arizona program. And as Joe mentioned, you know, they're getting a lot of buzz, and you know, they're doing some good things. They're landing some big recruits, but in year 1 to kind of slam that door in their face a little bit. Now, whether you know that determines the Wildcats' postseason fate or not, well, whatever. But bringing that cup home in year 1 is going to be a crucial thing and a crucial win for Kenny Dillingham.
I mean, think just, along those lines, how big of a win it was. It was a crazy game, but when Todd Graham won
Yeah.
his first year after that 2011 loss, I mean, that was a massive, massive thing that ended up being obviously a catalyst for a good season that year, even though it was at the tail end of the season, launching pad for some incredible 2013 and 14 teams.
All right. So on the flip side, gentlemen, we'll start with Caleb. What do you think is going to be just kind of the worst loss? Just like, ugh.
You know, part of me really wants to say at home versus Washington State. And it just brings me back to my freshman year at ASU when the offense turned it over on 3 straight drives to start the game. And there's just some energy about Wazoo that just kind of like, I don't know. I just kind of see Wazoo on the schedule. I'm like I don't know why this kind of makes my stomach turn a little bit. But I think it might be Wazoo, and I just feel like it's classic Arizona State fashion where it's like the one game that will set you up for success that you should win ends up not working out. So Wazoo.
That's actually my pick as well, because for the same reasons. I think that it's home. It's a game they shouldn't lose. Wazoo's lost a lot, especially on the defensive side. But yeah, I just think that, that, as I mentioned, I think there's going to be 2 kind of coin flip postseason determining type of games, UCLA and Wazoo. I think ASU splits because I think they lose Wazoo.
So you're talking about a bad loss about as far as ASU being a favorite and still losing,
Or
the
just
game?
an kind of a gross, just the worst. Just in.
I mean, I don't know if it really falls into your criteria of a bad loss, but I would say Washington on the road. I think that game can just get really, really ugly. I mean, October 21st in Seattle, the weather can be already really, really iffy.
Yeah.
As Doug Tammer, the ASU SAD, likes to remind us every other day, ASU is the last team to beat Washington. So you know that the Huskies are going to have just a little vengeance on their minds and then some. This game with explosive Washington offense and a defense that should be much improved from last year, and that's not saying much. I would say Washington on the road.
So I'm going to go in kind of a similar vein as Hode. I don't necessarily see any losses that are going to be, major disappointments. Like this is a team that ASU should beat by 10 points and they end up losing by 21 or something like that. But I'm going to go with Utah. It's on the road. It's November. It's early November, but I mean, it's still November in Salt Lake. The weather can be there. ASU has not had good luck against Utah. I mean, it's been since 2018, I think was the last time that ASU beat Utah in any location, if I'm not mistaken. So that's really trending in a different direction. Obviously, even though some are expecting that they may not be that conference champion mode that they have the last 2 years, you certainly can't count them out of anything. They play physical ball. And again, just having that game in Salt Lake, that environment can get pretty wild. Especially if it's a night game. Again, reiterating the month of November, it'll still be a heck of a lot colder there than it will be in Tempe. I was thinking about that Washington one as well, and I think that one could be not pretty because we've seen some not pretty games in Seattle, and especially against a team that can throw the ball around a lot. But I think that the Utah game, like we've seen before, I mean, that can get out of hand in a hurry.
All right, so trap game on the schedule. I'm going to again say Wazoo. I think the elements are there. Kind of coming off of that UW game and just feeling like they might be coming back in the comforts of home against a team that, is not nearly as talented as kind of sandwiched between the Utah and UW trips. But I think some bad things can happen there. Obviously, I picked it as a loss, so I think ASU does fall victim to the trap. So what do you think, Caleb?
I'll agree with that. I think somehow, some way, even if they do somewhat, I have ASU kind of winning a game that they're not supposed to win. And if that happens at Seattle for back-to-back years against Washington, I'm just telling it how it is in my heart that I just see that WSU logo and I'm just like, I don't, something just feels off. So that's it. That's just trap.
I'm going to say Fresno State because I think ASU is going to be 2-0 after beating Oklahoma State.
Oh,
and looking ahead to that USC game, yeah, I could see Fresno State being quite the trap game. Fresno State, for some people that don't know, did finish in the top 25 to end the 2022 season. However, they lost a lot on offense. I mean, pretty much every major aspect.
Jake Hayner's a saint.
Yeah, but just I think the top running back, the top 3 wide receivers and everything. But they had a pretty darn good defense, and I think they returned 8 starters, if I'm not mistaken, from that unit. So that can be a really tough contest. And again, I feel like ASU is going to look ahead to USC, especially if they start out 2-0.
Fresno State is my answer also. That one kind of reminds me, has the potential of like that San Diego State game in 2018. Obviously, that was a road game compared to a home game, and that's a big difference between those two. But the week after ASU had that exciting last-second victory over Michigan State, you go out and you just have a really, really frustrating loss in San Diego against the Aztecs. It's a trap game for me because of what it brings to the table, both with a loss or a win the week before. If ASU beats Oklahoma State, you're 2-0, and you get that kind of signature win. I know that not a lot of people are expecting Oklahoma State to be what they were a couple of years ago, but that would still be a huge feather in the cap for Kenny Dillingham to get in year one. You get that, and like Hode said, you might have some people looking ahead to that next week against USC at home, no less, and what could be an absolutely huge game if ASU's 3-0. Now, then by comparison, ASU loses to Oklahoma State, and of course, we're assuming that Southern Utah is a victory to open the season. If ASU's 1-1, then you look at that Fresno State game and like this immediately in week 3 becomes a must-win game. So it becomes crucial, and that adds a trap element to it as well, to where then it's just a heightened level of tension that, okay, things can kind of derail. If ASU goes 1-2 to start the season, going to be damn near impossible to get to bowl eligibility unless you really start turning things on. So I think that game just has something to it, because like Coach said, and what Jeff Tedford is doing there is something quite special. I mean, he has a knack for that. Think about what he did at Cal 15, 20 years ago. So the potential is there. It could be another one of those frustrating losses, almost like in Eastern Michigan, not quite to that level, because Fresno State has had its successes. So absolutely real crucial game that I think is going to have more importance than some people may be assigning to it at this point.
All right, next category, the number of first or second team all Pac-12 selections. And of course, as we talked about, ASU didn't have any in the preseason media poll, but ultimately that doesn't matter. So how many do you think? And you don't have to name them all. Bonus points if you'd like. I'll start off. I think 5, actually. I think Conyers and Badger can be too good to ignore. There are some good tight ends, but I think that Conyers season will elevate. He'll get on one of those 2 teams. Badger as well. I think BJ Green gets 1 spot, and then a DB. I'm not entirely sure yet. I also think Dario Longetto is going to have an outstanding season, kicking as the 5th member of that squad. Caleb, what do you think?
I'm going to say 4, and I think I agree with you. Any variation of receiver and tight end, to be quite honest with you. I know you especially have been very high on Dario, and rightfully so. And I think that he's got a great leg. And then I feel like you just have to throw a defender in there, and whether that be a DB or a BJ Green or a Clayton Smith, I'd say 4. 4 is a good number.
I'd say 3. I would say Conyers, Clayton Smith, and Longetto.
I'll say 3 also. ASU tends to get kind of hosed in these circumstances more often than not. Now, granted, I have a major bone to pick with 2017. I know I will believe to the day that I die that the coaches were just going against Todd Graham and the whole alleged sign stealing thing. But in any event, I'll go low hanging fruit. Conyers, Badger, BJ Green.
All right, Caleb, who's the team MVP when all is said and done?
Man, that's tough. I'm just trying to think of somebody in terms of just leader that I've noticed through fall camp, and I you know what? I'm gonna give it to BJ Green. I feel like a lot of people kind of look up to him, and there's a lot of people who look out for him, and I know he's not the most crazy vocal guy, and I think somebody that might be just right there is Jordan Clark too. But I think BJ's just gonna lead a little bit more on the field.
Talk about team MVP from a leadership standpoint, or just from a production standpoint?
Just kind of the MVP, who gets who's the most valuable Sun Devil on the field and off. Just collectively, who's going to be the guy?
I think Cam Scatterbo. I know some of you mentioned earlier that in terms of just all-purpose yards, he's definitely should be the leader. So that would be my pick.
I'll go with Conyers. I mean, for all the high expectations that I and others have of him, it wouldn't make a ton of sense to not have him bring that in. While I do agree, and Cam Scatterbo would be right up there, Bourget would be right up there, but obviously there's just uncertainty about how quarterback is going to shake out. if we're thinking that Conyers has the potential to break some school records, you're not going to do that in a way that doesn't have a significant impact on the team. And so that's kind of an easy answer for me.
Yeah, I'm choosing Jalen Conyers as well. I think he's going to, put up some big time numbers, but I also think he's going to put up a lot of those numbers in some big moments to help them win. And obviously, he's kind of one of the face of the program type guys. A lot of pressure is going to be on him. I think he's going to deliver and set himself well for next late April, early May or so when the draft rolls around. All right, home stretch here. Final record of in the regular season. Now, and if they make a bowl in your prediction, bonus points if you say where do you think they're going to end up. We'll start off with the elder statesman in the group, Rabino.
6-6 LA Bowl.
6-6 LA Bowl. All right, Caleb, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm gonna go 6-6 as well, and I think it should be 7-4. But I think, like we talked about, they're gonna like lose to Wazoo, but then like beat like an Oregon or like a USC at home somehow, some way, and it's just gonna even it out.
So you're saying
I mean,
6?
Yeah, 6-6.
6-6.
7-5.
Okay,
Yeah.
Where do you think they end up in terms of postseason?
I'm gonna have to go with Houghton. It's either gonna be I'll say LA Bowl, but I think maybe another trip to Las Vegas. It might be in store as well.
All right.
At the risk of being a broken record, I'll say 6-6 as well. I honestly have no idea the pecking order of the bowl games. It's just been a couple years since they've been to Vegas, and they obviously have to go Vegas, El Paso. They have to do that like 2 out of every 2 years. So I'll say Vegas.
All right. So the Vegas Bowl. I'm going to complete the clean sweep. 6-6. I think that ASU is going to stack some wins in the first half of the season, finishing before the bye 4-2. Some rough stretches down the back half, but I do think they lift the Territorial Cup, get to 500 in year one, and that we all get to go cover a game at SoFi at the LA Bowl. It's going to be a lot of fun there. All right, so I think that's going to be a good place to stop for this episode of Speak of the Devils. Would like to thank our outstanding guest and panel in studio here, Rabino, Caleb Campero. Caleb, the newcomer of the group, you can go first. Tell our listeners and viewers how they can keep up with all the great work that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm pretty much at practice every day, so subscribe to Devil's Digest. You can catch my daily practice reports and any other work I'm up to. I'm trying to get a little bit more active on Twitter. Twitter wasn't my first social media platform, so it's just at Caleb Campero, CalebCampero, and those two. And then at the same time, if I'm not at practice or if I'm not in class, I'm at Cactus Sports. So just come on down, say hi, and grab a couple things to get ready for football season.
Yeah, you can find me as always at Devil's Digest. Website is devilsdigest.com, and don't forget about our network right sale that's going to be taking place later on this week. 60% off all new annual memberships. This is going to be a much more exciting year than last year. So just make sure that you're a frequent subscriber and you're all tuned in for all the latest.
All right, and make sure you stay with the show on the social media side. Follow the show on Twitter at SOTD Podcast, on Instagram at Speak of the Devils. You can find us on YouTube and Facebook as well, and you can give me a follow on everything at bdenny29.
And you can follow me at Joe Healy 42. Thanks once again to all our awesome sponsors, also including Sun Devil Family Charities, 501c3 nonprofit organization created primarily for the purpose of raising funds to provide financial assistance to ASU alumni, students, staff, and immediate family members adversely affected by medical issues. Monetary donations are always appreciated and support those in need due to unexpected medical conditions. Sun Devil Family Charities also has volunteer and sponsorship opportunities available that you can learn about on their website. They also have a pretty big cornhole event coming up, I believe on the bye week this season in October. You can play, support the charity, and also win some cash prizes. Check their website out for all that information and all the ways you can help them out at sundevilfamily.org. And if you're a Fry's food shopper and you want to support Sun Devil Family Charities without spending a dime more than you normally do, that's the important part. Check out that website I told you about, sundevilfamily.org. You can sign up for Fry's Community Rewards by simply linking your Fry's card to Sun Devil Family Charities, once again, to support SDFC without spending any more money. That's a win-win in my book. And, of course, we're thrilled to welcome Smashin' Devil to the sponsorship family this year, a Sun Devil business built on pride and passion. Owners Alex and Karen Ladensack founded Smash and Devil in the fall of 2021. I bumped into Alex over the weekend. Great dude, fired up to be part of what we're doing here, fired up for the season to get started. Their concept was created from their love of cooking, Sun Devil pride, and desire to serve high-quality food truck fare to the Tempe area. They're die-hard Sun Devil fans, proud season ticket holders to ASU football, basketball, hockey, and baseball. When they aren't cooking, you can certainly find them at the nearest Sun Devil athletic event. Smash and Devil brings pride and passion to the food they cook, centered on delicious smashed burgers, signature smash and sauce, and vegetarian options. You can sub Impossible meat on any dish. They're open for pickup and delivery 9:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. Monday through Friday for their summer hours, which are still in effect. They're located in Tempe at 2013 East Cedar Street. You can check out their menu of burgers, burros, and more at smashanddevil.com. Give them a follow on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Smashin' Devil. As an unforgettable Sun Devil famously once said, passion is what makes life interesting.
All right. So once you're done supporting our amazing sponsors, make sure to drop us a 5-star review on the podcast platform of your choice. Joe and I will be back next week. Joe, we get to preview an actual football game. It's going to be a good time. ASU versus Southern Utah preview coming next week.